Chapter 1051. Arrows were shot everywhere as the two tigers brought Deacon Jean and the rest into the forest. As soon as they entered the woods, Moolinger and the rest caught a whiff of the thick scent of blood before they'd even gotten far. It seemed that this forest had just experienced a bloody massacre. The forest was too dense and the early morning sun was not strong enough to shine through the dense forest. Moolinger and the rest could not see anything clearly. They did not have time to ask as the archers behind them chased closely. There were also great movements in the dense forest on both sides. It seemed that there were pursuers coming from both sides. From time to time, sharp arrows were shot from behind and several times, they narrowly passed by them. Fortunately, the tigers were leading them so that they could concentrate on avoiding the attacks from behind. Otherwise, the consequences would be unimaginable. One must know that no matter if it was Deacon Jean or Moolinger and the rest of the women, their martial arts were ordinary. The group of people quickly left the dense forest and suddenly there was an open space in front of them. However, Moolinger and the rest were shocked by everything in front of them. The open space in front of them was simply a purgatory on earth. Corpses were lying on the ground and blood flowed like a river. There were at least 100 corpses. It was easy to determine that these people were all Dreamy's subordinates just by looking at their clothes. There were more than 100 corpses and all of them were badly mutilated. There was not a single intact corpse. Moreover, all of the wounds had turned black and the blood stains were all black. God knows if they were poisoned to death or bitten and dismembered by the tigers. Moolinger and Ningjing were disgusted and wanted to vomit several times. However, Bai Yuqiao did not care about her disgust. She was extremely shocked. When did so many guards lie in ambush around Tiger's prison? Why didn't she know? The reason why Tiger's prison was called Tiger's prison was because there was a big white tiger guarding it. With the big white tiger around, other defenses were superfluous. Unless Dreamy not only had to guard against them escaping, he also had to guard against a strong enemy coming to rescue them. Bai Yuqiao faintly sensed that something was wrong. She secretly pondered. At this time, the archer behind him had been dealt with by Poison Tiger. Two poison tigers caught up from behind and stood beside Deacon Jean. In this way, including the tiger leading the way, there were 5 of them. Deacon Jean did not ask them to stop, but they all stopped and looked to the right, as if they had discovered something. Seizing the opportunity, Bai Yuqiao probed, Jean Z, where's the other tiger? How did you tame them? According to Bai Yuqiao's understanding, Dreamy had a total of 6 poisonous tigers in Tiger's prison. They were all red-eyed white tigers that were abnormally ferocious. Moreover, they had all been raised into poison corpses. Whether it was in terms of physique or agility, they were much stronger than ordinary tigers. They would not be killed so easily. Deacon Jean did not pay any attention to Bai Yuqiao. He frowned and looked to the right, as if he was listening intently to something. Moolinger, Ningjing, and Bai Yuqiao looked at each other, not daring to move. The child in Moolinger's arms had already woken up. She opened her eyes and looked at Moolinger curiously. Despite all this, she did not cry. It was as if she knew that the adults were running for their lives and could not make a fuss. Moolinger quickly realized that the child was awake. She was overjoyed and quickly said to Ningjing, Sister Jing, she's awake. She's awake. She's looking at me. Ningjing's face was especially pale, and her forehead was covered with fine beads of sweat. She seemed to be in pain, but she still wanted to force a smile and smiled faintly at Moolinger. Sister Jing, I'll let you hold the child, Moolinger quickly said. Unexpectedly, Ningjing shook her head. She seemed to want to say something, but suddenly, her vision turned black and she fell down. Luckily, Bai Yuqiao caught her in time. The medicine that she drank last night had already taken effect. She did not look like she had just given birth at all. But this was only what it looked like. Her body was in pain, and she was so weak that she could not hold on any longer. Sister Jing. What's wrong with Sister Jing? Mu Ling was shocked. Bai Yuqiao hugged her and said to Deacon Jean, Jean Z, no matter what you're going to do, let's go quickly. Ning Jing can't hold on. Ning Jing, she's sick. How would Bai Yuqiao know that Deacon Jean already knew the truth? Before she could figure out whether Deacon Jean was a friend or foe, she was still very cautious. After all, Deacon Jean could actually control the tiger that Jun Yixia had tamed. He must not be simple. What kind of background did he have? If these tigers were normal tigers, then so be it. But these tigers had already been tamed by Jun Yixia into poison corpses. Deacon Jean could actually make them betray Jun Yixia. Bai Yuqiao felt that Deacon Jean and Jun Yixia had some kind of relationship. Mu Ling was extremely embarrassed and was about to explain. Unexpectedly, a large white tiger suddenly flew out from the bushes on the right. The person sitting on its back was none other than Su Xiaoyu. Su Xiaoyu was covered in blood, and that large white tiger was also injured. A large piece of flesh had been cut off from its hind leg. There's a group of poison corpses over there. They're coming over soon. Su Xiaoyu said while panting. If not for the large white tiger's protection and her own poison skills, she would have died long ago. Jun Yixia even ambushed poison corpses. Bai Yuqiao was incomparably shocked. What was Jun Yixia trying to do? Why did he ambush poison corpses at Tiger's prison? There were already 6 large white tigers and so many guards ambushing them. He even ambushed poison corpses. Could it be that he was guarding against Han Yunxi and Long Feiyi? Or could it be that this arrangement wasn't a precaution but was specially prepared for Han Yunxi and Long Feiyi? Bai Yuqiao seemed to have thought of something and suddenly felt uneasy. We must leave as soon as possible. Deacon Jean said and blew a whistle. In an instant, all the tigers became alert. Just as they were about to leave, unfortunately, the poison corpses on the right had already arrived. There were over 20 poison corpses, all of them had ashen faces and were expressionless like death soldiers. They came over and surrounded them from the right. At the same time, a group of sword-wielding guards appeared from the left. It was a pincer attack from the left and right. Fortunately, the group of archers at the back had already been dealt with by the large white tigers. But just as they were about to escape, a group of archers suddenly walked out from the forest in front of them. There were 2 rows of over 20 people, all of them with their bows drawn and ready to shoot. They were surrounded from the left, right and front, leaving only the back to escape. But the back was the road back to Tiger's prison. There was no escape route. Who are you? The leader of the archers asked angrily. Duke Kong had ordered for 3 inner and 3 outer layers of defense to be deployed around Tiger's prison. Who knew that the 3 outer layers of defense would suddenly be ambushed by the tiger horde? The tiger horde was a large wild tiger from the forest and not domesticated. The sudden attack caused the 3 outer layers of defense to suffer heavy losses. Who knew that the 3 inner layers of defense would be ambushed by 2 large white tigers? At first, they didn't know what was going on and only thought that these large white tigers had lost control. So other than running away, they didn't dare to resist at all for fear of injuring these large white tigers. It must be known that these 6 large white tigers were Duke Kang's prize treasures. Even Duke Kang's favorite, Hao San, didn't dare to mistreat these large white tigers, much less injure them. So, in just a short while, the 3 inner layers of defense of Tiger's prison suffered even more losses than the 3 outer layers. There were originally 300 archers, but now there were only 20 or so left. Until just now, they had been running away and hadn't taken the initiative to attack. It was only after hearing the report from the people who escaped from Tiger's prison that they found out the truth. Deacon Jean wasn't a person who liked to talk. He ignored the archers and tightly held on to Mu-Ling's waist with one hand and patted the large white tiger with the other. Suddenly, he charged towards the sword-wielding guards on the left. The moment he charged over, the tiger carrying Ning Jing, Bai Yuqiao and Su Xiaoyu immediately followed suit. The archers immediately released their arrows and the poison corpses also attacked. The tiger leading the way pounced on the archers while the remaining two pounced on the poison corpses. For a moment, arrows flew everywhere and a fight broke out. Deacon Jean protected Mu-Ling as they fled while fighting with the sword-wielding guards. Bai Yuqiao protected Ning Jing and was unarmed. All she could do was dodge. Su Xiaoyu was behind her and shouted at her, "Use poison." Idiot! This time, Bai Yuqiao remembered that she could use poison. She didn't bring any weapons with her, but she did bring a lot of poison. No matter what, she was still Bai Yanqing's disciple and had learned poison since she was young. Poison was useless against the corpses, but it was much more effective against the sword-wielding guards. Bai Yuqiao protected Ning Jing and leaned back, dodging the swords that swept towards them. She casually waved her hand and shot out 2 poison needles. They didn't hit the guards' vital points, but they hit their hands. However, it was enough to numb the guards' hands and make them unable to wield their swords. The guards on the other side wanted to attack, but the white tiger pounced over and trampled them under its feet. The big white tiger's sharp claws viciously slapped the guard's heart, causing him to spit out blood and die. Careful! Su Xiaoyu suddenly jumped up from the tiger's back and kicked away the arrow that was flying towards Bai Yuqiao. Thanks! Bai Yuqiao said loudly. Su Xiaoyu ignored her and continued to dodge the arrows. Deacon Jean had already brought Mu-Ling and escaped far away. However, Bai Yuqiao and Su Xiaoyu were pincered by the sword-wielding guards and archers. A few poison corpses avoided the poison tigers and attacked them. Su Xiaoyu, I'll cover you. Hurry and run. Bai Yuqiao said loudly. Su Xiaoyu looked at her suspiciously. She wanted to ask but decided against it. She said, "Look after Ning Jing. I don't need you to cover me." At this time, a sharp arrow flew over from behind and snapped on Bai Yuqiao's shoulder. Bai Yuqiao pulled it out without hesitation and said coldly, "It's poisonous." She quickly realized that she couldn't cure the poison and immediately switched to her other hand to hug Ning Jing. Su Xiaoyu jumped up from the tiger's back again and landed behind Bai Yuqiao to help her block the arrows. The injured tiger didn't have to care about Su Xiaoyu anymore and actually pounced towards the archers like crazy. In a moment, all the archers were scared and stopped. Bai Yuqiao and the rest wanted to take the opportunity to escape, but there were too many incompetent poison corpses and they couldn't deal with them all. The white tiger had to take care of their safety and couldn't kill as many enemies as it wanted. Gradually, the 3 people and 6 tigers were surrounded by the poison corpses and the few remaining archers and guards. Bai Yuqiao looked to the left and said in a low voice, "What does Jin Zi mean? Did he escape by himself?" Indeed, Jin Zi had already protected Mu-Linger and escaped far away and was already very safe. Mu-Linger held on to Jin Zi with one hand and pinched Deacon Jean with the other. "Go back and save them. Go back and save them. They'll die. Ning Jing will die. Let go. If you don't go, I'll go. Let go." Mu-Linger was furious. She pinched Deacon Jin's arm so hard that it almost bled. Deacon Jin's brows were tightly knitted. It was obvious that he couldn't stand the pain, but he didn't make a sound. Chapter 1052. Even though Deacon Jean couldn't stand the pain, he let Mu Ling bite him without making a sound. In the end, it was Mu Ling who let go of him. She said angrily, "Jean Z, I'm telling you, if I wasn't carrying the child, I wouldn't let you off. You also know that you're carrying the child. Are you going back to die?" Deacon Jean asked in return. He really didn't know why he had been bewitched by such a stupid woman. Instead of rejoicing that she was able to bring the child out of danger, she wanted to go back to save them. Did she not understand the meaning of "do what you can't do"? With Deacon Jin's question, Mu Ling finally realized that her safety was the child's comfort. Even so, she was still worried about Sister Jing and the rest. Especially Sister Jing. If something happened to Sister Jing, what would happen to the child? What would happen to Tang Li? What would she do? "Jean Z, don't you have a way to save them?" Mu Ling asked in a choked voice. "You're begging me?" Deacon Jean asked. At this time, Mu Ling didn't care about having a backbone. Backbone couldn't save people, and it couldn't be eaten. She nodded seriously. I'm begging you, I'm begging you." Unexpectedly, Deacon Jean replied coldly, "It's useless even if you beg me." "You." Mu Ling was so angry that she wanted to kick him off his horse. Damn it. As soon as she said that, the sound of tiger roar came from all around them. Used to hearing the howls of tiger roar, Mu Ling could immediately tell that the tiger roar she heard now was completely different from the one in Tiger's prison. What's going on? The child seemed to have sensed the danger around them and suddenly started wailing. Mu Ling quickly hugged the child tightly and comforted him. "Good boy, don't cry, don't cry. Godmother is here, it's okay. Godmother will protect you. Don't cry, be a good girl." Deacon Jean was especially disdainful. He snorted and looked around. Mu Linger was not in the mood to argue with him. She was choking with sobs, but her tears did not fall. She was still trying to smile and make the baby laugh. However, the baby did not smile. Instead, he cried even harder. Just as Mu Linger was at a loss, Deacon Jean reached out and let the little doll suck on his little finger. The baby immediately stopped crying and started sucking carefully. "It's dirty." Mu Linger panicked. "Why are you being so particular at a time like this? You dirty yourself and get out." Manager Jean said unhappily. Only then did Mu Linger shut her mouth. At this time, a group of big tigers ran out from the surrounding forest. They were not white tigers, but big tigers with green eyes and stripes. Mu Linger was dumbfounded. There were at least 10 big tigers in this group, and they were not hostile to them at all. They all ran behind them. Mu Linger then realized that this group of big tigers might be here to help them. She asked in shock, "Jean Z, you know the language of beasts like Jun Xie?" Deacon Jean did not answer her. Mu Linger said again, "Jean Z, my sister said in the letter that the Black Clan knows the language of beasts. You're not from the Black Clan, are you?" Deacon Jean clearly froze for a moment, but he quickly recovered and said coldly, "Don't talk nonsense. Otherwise, why would these tigers listen to you? Also, why would Jun Xie's tigers listen to you?" Mu Linger asked again. Bai Yuqiao said that Jun Xie spent several years to tame 6 big white tigers, but you tamed them in such a short time. Mu Linger was shocked as she spoke. "Jean Z, you're much more powerful than Jun Xie. You can't be a direct descendant of the Black Clan too, right?" Deacon Jean was stunned. Just as he did not know how to answer, 2 big white tigers carrying Bai Yuqiao and the others ran over. Bai Yuqiao and Su Xiaoyu's faces and bodies were covered with wounds. Ning Jing was still unconscious and was tightly protected by Bai Yuqiao. Seeing that they were coming, Deacon Jean did not think too much and said loudly, "Run to the right and enter the mountain." Only the heavens knew how many guards Junisia had deployed around them. They only had one way to go, and that was to enter the mountain. If they walked into the deep mountains and forests, firstly, the road was complicated and difficult to find. Secondly, the forest was the tiger's territory. With the tiger's protection, they would be very safe. The group of people quickly escaped from the deep mountains. After a while, the three big white tigers at the back caught up. However, just as the big white tigers were about to catch up with Deacon Jean and the others, they both fell. Not knowing what happened, the three tigers' heads suddenly shed fur and festered. Moreover, it spread to their entire bodies at lightning speed. After their fur festered, their flesh and bones also started to fester. The three huge creatures turned into three pools of blood in the end, and the shape of the blood looked like three big tigers lying on the ground. When the guards of Tiger's prison caught up, they only saw three big pools of blood on the ground. "What is this? Why is it so smelly? Don't touch it, will it be poisonous? This can't be the three white tigers, right? Don't you think it looks like them? Hurry up and search. If we can't find them, none of us can live." The remaining few guards started to split up and search. Not long later, one of the guards found two strange pools of blood in the forest. When everyone rushed over, they were all shocked. They saw that these two pools of blood were the same as the three pools of blood from before. It was extremely smelly. One of the pools looked like a tiger lying on the ground. The other pool was even more strange. Not only did it look like a tiger, there seemed to be a person lying on the tiger's back. The guards looked at each other in dismay, not knowing what was going on. Were these pools of blood really formed from the white tigers? If it was, then what about Mulinger and the rest? There were obviously 6 white tigers, so why were there only 5 pools of blood? Mulinger and the rest, including the baby in swaddling clothes, were obviously 5 people. Why was the pool of blood only in the shape of one person? What had happened to them? Could it be that they were poisoned? One of the guards asked in a panic. Then who poisoned them? Another person quickly asked. In my opinion, they were cursed. Someone timidly said. In that moment, everyone became nervous. The guards could not come to a conclusion. When they saw the strange pools of blood, they became more and more afraid. In the end, they did not dare to go deeper into the forest to look for them. They immediately rushed back to Tiger's prison and reported everything to Jun Yixia, who was far away in the army. When Jun Yixia received the news of the incident at Tiger's prison, he had just imprisoned Ning Qing and had not yet interrogated him. What? He suddenly stood up in disbelief. If it was said that someone was able to kill their way through the encirclement and save the people in Tiger's prison, he would still believe it. However, the guards told him that a black-clothed man controlled 6 poisonous tigers and even tigers that covered the entire mountain to save the hostages. How could he believe this? He, a descendant of the Black clan, had spent a lot of effort to tame those white tigers. How could someone be able to control those white tigers to betray him? Rather than saying that understanding the language of beasts was the Black clan's secret technique, it was better to say that understanding the language of beasts was the Black clan's innate talent. Every generation had different innate talents, but the Black clan's direct descendants had the highest innate talents. Those with low innate talents could only understand the sounds of insects and birds. Those with high innate talents could understand the sounds of large animals. The Black clan's secret technique was the beast taming technique. In fact, they borrowed the innate talent of understanding the language of beasts to gain the ability to control beasts. Jun Yixia remembered very clearly that his father did not have any siblings. He was the only son in the family. His innate talent was the highest among all the Black Clan members. The other Black Clan members who understood the language of beasts could only understand the language of low-level animals. They were not of much help to him. The few people who understood the language of horses had always been hiding in Northern Lee's horse farms. It was because of this that he controlled many of Northern Lee's horse farms. Even he was unable to completely tame the tiger race, which was the king race of beasts. That black-clothed man, where did he come from? How was he related to the Black Clan? Master, that black-clothed man could also be. Before Hao San could finish his words, Jun Yixia stopped him. He firmly denied it, there is no such possibility. He naturally knew what Hao San wanted to say. What Hao San wanted to say was, could that black-clothed man also be a direct descendant of the Black Clan? He did not think that there was such a possibility. Even if there was, he would definitely not admit it. He was the one with the most noble bloodline in the Black Clan. He was the one with the highest innate talent. Facing his furious master, Hao San did not dare to say anything else. Go and prepare. This king will personally make a trip to Tiger's prison. Jun Yixia said coldly. Yes. Hao San quickly retreated. He lowered his head, but his eyes were filled with disdain and a cold smile. After Hao San left, Jun Yixia paced back and forth in the military camp. He was restless. In the end, he could not help but rush into the prison. Ning Cheng had just been brought into the military prison. At this moment, he was tied up and hung on the rack. He never expected that everything between him and Bai Yuqiao would be exposed at a time like this. No matter how he racked his brains, he couldn't figure out how Jun Yixia had discovered that Bai Yuqiao was a spy. Bai Yuqiao was the one who understood Jun Yixia the most. Her every move was carefully thought out. Moreover, they had worked together for so long without any trouble. Why was it exposed at this juncture? What he was most worried about was that Ning Jing's pregnancy would arouse Jun Yixia's suspicions. However, Jun Yixia should not know that the one who was pregnant was not Mu Linger, but Ning Jing. Ning Qing thought about it again and again. In the end, he locked onto Jin Zi and Uncle Cheng as suspects. Although Uncle Cheng was closer to him, he did not hesitate to suspect Uncle Cheng. Actually, at this point, suspecting anyone was useless. The only thing he was glad about was that Han Yunxi and Long Fei Yi had delayed the rescue and northern expedition. From Jun Yixia's recent actions, he should not know that the northern expedition had been delayed. Ning Cheng's hands were hung up high. He had his head lowered and his brows tightly knitted. One of his eyes was blind, while the other eye was dimly lit by the candlelight. There was a hint of determination and killing intent hidden in his eyes. In a fit of anger, Jun Yixia strode in and whipped Ning Qing with his whip. Without a word, he aimed it at Ning Qing. With a swoosh, Ning Cheng's skin was immediately split open. Jun Yixia had been tricked to this extent. It was already his limit to not whip Ning Qing until now. Speak. Who was the black-clothed man who saved Mu Linger and the others? Jun Yixia asked loudly. Mu Linger and Ning Jing were saved. Ning Qing was very surprised. He suddenly raised his head. Chapter 1053. Didn't they agree to postpone the rescue mission and the expedition to the north? Why did they suddenly decide to rescue her? Ning Qing didn't know that Ning Jing had given birth, nor did he know the exact situation at Tiger's prison. He quickly realized that Han Yunxi and Long Fei Yi wouldn't be the ones to rescue her. If they wanted to rescue her, they would have started the expedition to the north. Then who was this saint deity that could rescue her from Jun Yixia's heavy defenses? Ning Cheng's first thought was Bai Yanqing. However, judging from Jun Yixia's reaction, it couldn't be Bai Yanqing. Otherwise, Jun Yixia wouldn't have questioned him so angrily. Ningqing let Jun Yixia beat him without making a sound. In the end, Jun Yixia was tired and Ningqing was covered in wounds. Jun Yixia fell to the ground dejectedly while Ningqing looked at him condescendingly. What exactly happened at Tiger's prison that made Jun Yixia so angry and dispirited? At night, Jun Yixia secretly left the military camp with Ningqing and rushed to Tiger's prison. He didn't know what was going on with the oddly shaped blood that the guards reported. He had to go to the scene to understand. Jun Yixia rushed to Tiger's prison with Ningqing. At the same time, Han Yunxi and the others were also rushing to Tiger's prison. It had been several days since they sent the letter to Tianshan. They should have received a reply by now, but there was no news at all. Long Fei Yi used specially trained eagles to send the letter to Tianshan. They could withstand the snowstorms of Tianshan. Moreover, there were special messengers at the top of Tianshan to send letters. It was the end of spring and the beginning of summer. The snow on Tianshan had almost melted and the weather was just right. It was easy for people to go up and down Tianshan, let alone eagles. Long Fei Yi knew that something must have happened to Sky Mountain. Therefore, in the past few days, they had not rested at all. They had been traveling day and night. It must be the evil sword sect. Long Fei Yi said. In today's martial arts world, only the evil sword sect could shake Sky Mountain, and only Bai Yanqing could touch the three supremacies. How long has that old fox been hiding in Tianshan Mountain? Han Yunxi was worried. Did Bai Yanqing already know about the matter of the phoenix power? Who was the one who wrote the replies they sent back? Were the various explanations regarding the dual cultivation of phoenix power and lustbite power true or false? Had they been tricked by that old fox, Bai Yanqing? In my opinion, that old fox must have attacked the top of Tianshan Mountain after the beginning of spring. Otherwise, you wouldn't have been unable to receive the letter until now. Gu interrupted. He knew that anything related to Bai Yanqing was not a small matter. It was not for any other reason, but because in this world, the only person Long Fei Yi could not deal with was Bai Yanqing. If the previous letters were all forged, then Bai Yanqing did not need to stop replying at this time. He could continue to forge another one to avoid arousing their suspicion. Han Yunxi and Long Fei Yi agreed with Gu's guess. Seeing that both of them nodded, Gu suddenly stopped his horse and asked seriously, if that's the case, do you still plan to continue to Sky Mountain? If his guess was right, they would be courting death if they went to Sky Mountain now. Who knew how many traps Bai Yanqing had prepared for them? Long Fei Yi and Han Yunxi exchanged glances. They had thought of what Gu had thought of. Not to mention that they still did not understand the truth behind the phoenix power. Even if they did not understand the phoenix power and dual cultivation, they still had to go to Sky Mountain. This matter did not only concern Elder Kenzo and the three supremacies, but also the entire Tianshan Kenzo. Tianshan Kenzo had countless disciples, countless sword manuals, and countless treasured swords. It had always been the leader of the martial arts world. Once Tianshan Kenzo fell into Bai Yanqing's hands, it would become a tool for the heretical sword sect to wreak havoc in the martial arts world. Before the world was in chaos, the martial arts world would be in chaos first. They had already sacrificed their time on the northern expedition to rush here. There was no reason for them to turn back, and there was no reason for them to hide. Moreover, they had already found 7 types of 10,000 poisons. Now, they were only left with Bai Yanqing's blood and the little thing's poisonous blood. Even if Bai Yanqing did not look for them, they would look for Bai Yanqing one day. Coldly, Han Yunxi said, even if it's a mountain of swords or a sea of flames, we're not afraid of him. She had not had the time to cultivate recently, but her connection with the little thing was getting stronger. She could clearly feel the little thing cultivating, and could also clearly feel the little thing's poisonous fangs recovering. The little thing must have eaten a lot of good things in Bai Yanqing's poison storage space. She even had a faint sense of familiarity these past 2 nights. She only felt that the poison storage space was about to level up again. This feeling was very similar to the one she felt when the poison storage space leveled up from level 1 to level 2 on Sky Mountain. Perhaps, the little thing would continue to help her level up this time. As long as her poison storage space leveled up to level 3, the little thing would be free. As long as they got the little thing's poisonous blood, they really did not have to fear Bai Yanqing's indestructible body. Gu could not convince Han Yunxi and Long Fei Yi, so he could only follow in silence. Gu was worried that once he had to fight with Bai Yanqing, he would have no choice but to reveal his secret. Gu was conflicted, and a very arrogant idea came to him. He thought he had to think of a way to challenge Bai Yanqing to a duel, and avoid Poison Girl and the others. The group sped up, speeding towards Sky Mountain. At their speed, they would reach the foot of Sky Mountain in about 5 days. A few days passed, and Jun Yixie brought Ningqing back to Tiger's prison. Take him to the dungeon, and give him 1 antidote a day. Remember that. If he dies, this prince will have all of you buried with him. Cold, Jun Yixie said Jun Yixie. Ningqing still did not know about the bloody water. He was already Jun Yixie's last hostage. He thought, no matter who saved Mu Linger and the others, as long as it was not Bai Yanqing, the situation would not be too bad. He was the only hostage left in Jun Yixie's hands, so he did not have to think too much. After imprisoning Ningqing in the dungeon of Tiger's prison, Jun Yixie had the guards lead the way to see the pools of blood. Although the 3 pools of blood had already dried up, there were dark red marks on the ground that even the rain could not wash away. When Jun Yixie saw it, he immediately determined that the blood belonged to the poisonous tigers he had tamed, and the tigers had died from poison. Master, who could be the next killer? Hao Sen asked in a low voice. The poisonous tigers that Jun Yixie had tamed had already been turned into poisonous corpses, so they had the ability to resist most poisons. Only a few rare high-level poisons could poison them to death. In other words, the poison skills of the person who could poison these poisonous tigers to death were definitely not ordinary. Jun Yixie ignored Hao San and asked coldly, "Are you sure that Mu Linger and the others rode the white tigers to escape?" "Your Highness Duke of Kong, we all saw it with our own eyes." When Mu Linger was giving birth, the midwife also entered the room, and it was also the white tigers that blocked the way. The guard reported truthfully. If it was not for the fact that they did not dare to attack the white tigers in the beginning and lost a lot of time, Mu Linger and the others might not have been able to escape. Many of the guards at Tiger's prison had died, and the survivors all resented those poisonous tigers. Of course, they only dared to complain in their hearts. Jun Yixie still did not say anything and walked into the dense forest. The 2 pools of blood in the dense forest had also dried up, leaving behind a mark that could not be erased. Jun Yixie stopped beside the human-shaped blood mark. He used his finger to lightly smear some of the blood, sniffed it seriously, and took it away without another word. He spent half a day to identify that this blood was human blood and not tiger blood. Furthermore, it was the blood of a woman who had died after being poisoned. What exactly had happened? Jun Yixie was certain that the person who poisoned the white tigers was definitely not Han Yunxi. Other than Han Yunxi, who else had such high poison skills to be able to poison 5 white tigers to death in such a short period of time? Where did the last white tiger go? Who was the woman who was poisoned to the point that not even her bones remained? Where did the rest of the people go? A complicated look flashed past Hao San's eyes, and he asked again, "Master, could it be that that Hao San was referring to was Bai Yanqing? If he wanted to make a move, why wait until now?" Why go through so much trouble? Jun Xia asked coldly. Compared to the person who poisoned them, he was more concerned about the identity of the black-robed man. Right at this moment, a guard hurriedly came to report, Your Highness the Sanfua Duke, Uncle Qing has been found, but Deacon Jean has not been found. Jun Xia looked over sharply, extremely displeased. Bring him in. After the riot at Tiger's Den, Uncle Qing and Deacon Jean had both disappeared. The guards had been searching nearby, and only today did they find Uncle Qing. Tiger's Den was surrounded by dense forests, and they had set up many ambushes. Even if Uncle Qing escaped from Tiger's Den, he might not be able to walk out of this forest. Jun Xia had always thought that the black-robed man was an intruder, and had never understood that the black-robed man was Deacon Jean. As soon as Uncle Qing was brought over, before he could even open his mouth to beg for mercy, Jun Xia viciously stepped over him, directly stomping him to the ground. Where's Jean Zi? I don't know, I haven't seen him since that night. Your Highness the Sanfua Duke, on account of my meritorious service in reporting the news, please spare me. Uncle Qing hurriedly pleaded. Not only was he pleading, but he was also reminding Jun Xia that he was an elder of the D clan and could provide a lot of information about the D clan, so he could not be killed. Jun Xia was naturally aware of this, or else he would not have kept Uncle Qing alive until now. What exactly is Jean Zi's background? Jun Xia questioned. By now, he was more or less suspicious. Nothing much. He was just a slave that the Winter Crow tribe bought from the three-way black market, and Master Ning bought him, Uncle Qing answered truthfully. Jun Xia had naturally investigated this matter. Could he have been the one to save her? Jun Xia asked directly. Uncle Qing immediately denied it. Your Highness the Sanfua Duke, if Jean Zi could save someone, he would have done so long ago. Why wait until now? These words were indeed reasonable. Jun Xia became irritated. He released his foot from Uncle Cheng's back, and Uncle Qing heaved a sigh of relief. Just as he was about to get up, Jun Xia suddenly kicked him viciously in the face, sending him flying. Men, take him to the dungeon. Tell Ning Qing that he was the one who betrayed the D clan. Jun Xia said coldly. He could not kill Ning Qing now, but he could slowly torture Ning Qing. Tonight, I will let Ning Qing have a taste of being betrayed by his loyal servant. Chapter 1054. The guards escorted Uncle Qing to the entrance of the dungeon. Jun Xia also followed. He suddenly regretted it. He let the guards leave and let Uncle Qing go in by himself. Instead of telling Ning Qing that Uncle Qing is a traitor, it's better to let Uncle Qing continue to deceive him. Perhaps this show will be more exciting. Go in by yourself. This prince can't control your life and death. Ning Qing can. Jun Xia said as he kicked Uncle Qing in. Uncle Qing didn't understand Jun Xia's meaning. After he fell to the ground, he quickly got up and carefully walked in. Jun Xia had actually been following behind him. He was hiding in the shadows, quietly waiting to watch the show. After passing through the long entrance passage, there was a narrow space. The dungeon was very small. If there was a rack, a prisoner, and 2 or 3 more people came in, it would be full. Back then, Jun Xia had considered that Mu Ling was going to give birth and Su Xiaoyu was going to recuperate, so he didn't lock them in the dungeon. Now that he thought about it, he really trusted Bai Yuqiao too much. Otherwise, he wouldn't have let so many hostages escape without leaving a single one. With hostages in hand, even if Long Fei Yi and Han Yunxi went north, he wouldn't be afraid. Now, he only has Ning Qing in his hands. If he wants to resist the pressure from the south, he still has to start with the D clan. As soon as Uncle Qing came in, Ning Qing knew. However, he kept his head down, pretending not to see anything, and didn't say a word. A trace of timidity flitted through Uncle Chang's eyes. He carefully leaned against the wall, not daring to move or make a sound. His shoulder was almost broken by Junie and his chin was already swollen. However, these physical pains were far less painful than the pain in his heart. Looking at Master Ning like this, looking at Ning Qing, whom he had watched grow up, he felt nothing but heartache. As the head of the D clan, the head of the Ning family army, and the head of the myriad merchant palace, he had military power and financial power. He should have been high-spirited, able to call the wind and summon the rain, dominating a region. But now, he was reduced to such a sorry state. One-eyed, banished, and dejected. Where did the once inviolable and arrogant Ningqing go? Uncle Chang's eyes were wet. He hoped that Master Ning would look up at him, but he was also afraid that Master Ning would know about his betrayal. He admitted that he had selfish motives for defecting. If Mu Linger and Ning Jing were rescued, even if Ning Jing didn't pursue the matter, Mu Linger would never forgive him. But the real reason for his betrayal was to destroy the cooperation between the D clan and East Qin. They had been loyal to the D clan for 2 generations. They had witnessed how much the D clan had sacrificed for revenge and the recovery of Western Qin. He couldn't accept the alliance between the D clan and East Qin. The D clan and East Qin's cooperation didn't count as cooperation at all. Simply put, the D clan was being used by East Qin. The D clan brothers were simply fighting for East Qin and Long Fei Ye's power. Han Yunshi had no intentions of reviving her country. After the northern expedition destroyed Northern Li, Long Fei Yi would definitely swallow up Western Zhou and Tian and to unite Cloud Realm continent. By then, Long Fei Yi would only revive the East Qin Empire while Han Yunshi, the Western Qin princess, would become East Qin's empress. The D clan would become the East Qin's slaves. How could he swallow this anger? He would rather be the head of a chicken than the tail of a phoenix. With Ning Cheng's abilities and the D clan's strength, it wouldn't be difficult for them to gain a foothold in Cloud Realm continent by borrowing the name of Western Qin's imperial court. Even if Ning Qing divided Tianning into his own territory and amassed a large army, Long Fei Yi wouldn't be able to do anything to the D clan for the sake of Han Yunshi's face. Why was Ning Qing so stupid as to charge into the enemy lines for Long Fei's sake? It was a strenuous and thankless task. Only by destroying the cooperation between East Qin and the D clan could Ning Qing be forced to a dead end. Either he died, or he sincerely cooperated with Junie Xia to gain a foothold for himself and the D clan. Uncle Cheng had been cooped up in his room while he was locked up in Tiger's prison to think and hesitate over these matters. He was certain that Junie Xia had reached a dead end under the current circumstances, especially with all the hostages gone. Junie Xia had nowhere else to go. Junie Xia had no choice but to cooperate with the D clan. Otherwise, once Long Fei Yi and Han Yunshi sent their troops north, everything he had painstakingly built up in Northern Li would be swept clean. In other words, the current situation was Junie Xia begging Ning Qing, not Ning Qing begging Junie Xia. Uncle Qing stood there for a long while before he saw that Master Ning didn't move. Finally, he took a deep breath and walked over. He was already standing in front of Ning Qing, but Ning Cheng's head was still bowed. Anyone who didn't know better might think he was unconscious. Master Ning, Uncle Qing spoke in a low voice. He had planned to first analyze the current situation in Tiger's prison with Ning Qing, as well as the situation between the D clan and Junie Xia. Then, he would turn himself in and force Ning Qing to make a choice. But who knew that before he could speak, Ning Qing would suddenly kick him ruthlessly. Only God knew how much strength and anger Ning Qing had used to send Uncle Qing flying with just one kick. Uncle Qing crashed into the stone wall behind him. After he fell to the ground, he immediately spat out a mouthful of blood. He raised his head in disbelief. Master Ning, don't think I don't know what you've done. Ning Qing roared angrily. Zhu Nixia, who was hiding in the dark, was rather shocked. He hadn't expected Ning Qing to guess that Uncle Qing had betrayed him. It had to be said that Zhu Nixia was very disappointed. Still, he continued to wait patiently. Uncle Qing crawled to his feet with difficulty. After all, he was getting on in years. After being kicked so many times in the past hour, he couldn't even stand steadily. He was even more shocked than Zhu Nixia. He hadn't said a word, but Master Ning was already suspecting him. Qing Xianmin, you didn't betray me, but the D clan. The oath you swore to be loyal to my father. Ning Qing thought he could hold himself back, but now he couldn't restrain his anger. Master Ning, why don't you work together with Zhu Nixia? Only by working with Zhu Nixia can you hold on to this tiny piece of Tianing. Otherwise, the D clan will become East Qin's slaves in the end. Uncle Qing said loudly. A complicated look flitted past Zhu Nixia's eyes, but he didn't say a word. He'd never liked Uncle Qing, but now it looked like Uncle Qing was his benefactor. If Uncle Qing could convince Ning Qing, he wouldn't mind giving Ning Qing another chance. Ning Qing glared fiercely at Uncle Qing as he said word by word, Qing Xianmin, you are my D clan's first and only traitor. You don't have the right to speak to this clan head. Get out. Master Ning. Why do you persist in going about things the wrong way? Uncle Qing was angry as well. What's so good about Han Yunxi? What's so good about her? Master Ning, with your current actions, are you loyal to Western Qin, or to Han Yunxi alone? Han Yunxi is Western Qin is Han Yunxi. Ning Qing angrily roared. Uncle Qing gave a cold laugh. Master Ning, when Long Feiyi flattens northernly and when Long Feiyi recovers East Qin, there will no longer be Western Qin or Han Yunxi. There will only be the East Qin Empress. Enough. Ning Qing angrily said. Master Ning, you should properly think about it. Zhu Nixia is in a dilemma right now, so he doesn't have any room to negotiate with you. As long as you sincerely cooperate with him, you can use his military strength to fight for a place for the D clan in Cloud Realm. Uncle Qing said. When Zhu Nixia, who was hiding in the shadows, heard this, he was first stunned before his entire person turned bad. He had clearly come to watch a good show, but instead of seeing a good show, he had been checkmated by Uncle Qing. This damn Qing Xianmin, he was actually so shrewd. So his betrayal wasn't a true betrayal, but a well-intentioned one. Zhu Nixia narrowed his eyes, the anger on his face growing stronger. He almost rushed out, but he had to convince himself to hold back. Even though Uncle Qing was repulsive, his analysis just now was completely correct. His situation was far worse than the D clans. Other than cooperating with Ning Qing, he had no other way out. Moreover, if he cooperated with Ning Qing, he wouldn't be able to gain any benefits. If the one imprisoned here was Mu Linger, he would still have a bargaining chip with Han Yunxi. If the one imprisoned here was Ning Jing, he could still ask for the Tang sect support. However, the one imprisoned here was Ning Qing. How could Han Yunxi and Long Feiyi be controlled by him for the head of the D clan? These two fellows couldn't wait to use this opportunity to sacrifice Ning Qing so that the D clan would fall apart. If the Long Feiyi lost the D clan's military strength, he could still conquer the north. However, if he lost the D clan's support, whether it was financial or military support, he wouldn't be able to resist the Long Feiyi's army. Thinking of this, Zhu Nixia's entire heart felt stifled. At this moment, Ning Qing had already lowered his head. He didn't look at Uncle Qing, nor did he speak any more nonsense. Master Ning, this subordinate betrayed Miss Jing. This subordinate never had the heart to betray you. Seeing that Ning Qing was ignoring him, Uncle Qing could only wait. He clutched his aching chest and sighed. Master Ning, you should consider it carefully. If you insist, only death awaits you. Long Fei Yi and Han Yunxi won't cherish your life. After Uncle Qing finished speaking, he was about to retreat to the side. Who knew that Ning Qing would suddenly raise his leg again and ruthlessly kick Uncle Qing away? This time, Uncle Qing crashed into the wall and fell down. He didn't stand up again and fainted. Ning Cheng's body swayed violently on the torture rack because he used too much strength. He didn't even look at Uncle Qing. His head was lowered the entire time, and no one knew what he was thinking. Zhu Nixia wanted to approach, but he suddenly stopped. He had noticed Ning Cheng's feet. He didn't think that Ning Cheng's feet would explode with such strength even when he was hung up like this. If it wasn't for today's discovery, he would be in danger if he approached Ning Qing. Zhu Nixia silently turned and left. When he reached the prison door, he gave an order in a low voice, lock Ning Cheng's feet. Zhu Nixia walked into the forest alone. If Ning Qing didn't cooperate with him, how should he deal with Long Fei Yi and Han Yunxi? Seeing that the D clan and East Qin army were about to head north, he was in imminent danger. Who was the person who kidnapped Mu Linger? What was their goal? Was it for Mu Linger's group, or was it for him? Zhu Nixia was extremely vexed. There was nothing he could do but wait. Meanwhile, Long Fei Yi and Han Yunxi had already reached the foot of Celestial Mountain. That night, they were resting in a hidden cave at the foot of the mountain. This was where Long Fei Yi used to rest when climbing the mountain. It was also where he used to hide from Duan Muyao's cultivation. Besides Su Donglin, the only other person who knew about this place was Chu Shifeng. They had just finished eating their rations and were preparing to discuss climbing the mountain when a rustling sound came from outside. Who is it? Long Fei Yi immediately chased after the sound. Chapter 1055. Hearing the commotion outside the cave, Long Fei Yi immediately chased after them, but didn't see anyone outside. Han Yunxi and the rest followed suit, but Long Fei Yi gestured for them to stay put. He looked towards the grass in front of him and cautiously walked over step by step. He knew that there was someone there and was prepared to take action. But who would have thought that when he got very close, the person hiding in the bushes didn't move? Very soon, he smelled the scent of blood, which made him even more cautious. He stopped and gripped his sword. Unexpectedly, that person suddenly shouted, "Master! Master! It's me, Master, it's me!" Long Fei Yi was alarmed. Han Yunxi and the rest were stunned as well. They all recognized this voice. It was Chu Shifeng's. "Boss!" Su Donglin was the first to rush over, so excited that he fell into the grass and scrambled to his feet. Soon enough, he reached Chu Shifeng's side. Long Fei Yi drew close as well and knitted his brows at the sight of Chu Shifeng. Han Yunxi and the rest hurried over, leaving Han Yunxi gaping at the sight of Chu Shifeng. What happened? Chu Shifeng was in a sorry state, his hair disheveled and his face dirty. His clothes were torn and tattered, and his entire body was covered in bruises and swollen wounds. Han Yunxi swept her eyes over his legs and knew that the bones in his legs were probably all broken. Moreover, the injuries were still there. Chu Shifeng was very excited to see Long Fei Yi, but when he saw Han Yunxi next, he didn't dare to meet her eyes. Instead, he averted his gaze. Boss, just what happened to you?" Su Donglin's voice was choked with sobs as tears welled up in his eyes. Seeing this, Chu Shifeng grew angry. "You're already so old, yet you're still crying. Aren't you ashamed?" Su Donglin turned away and wiped away his tears. He seemed to be both angry and hurt, but didn't look back. Chu Shifeng ignored him and quickly said to Long Fei, "Master, this subordinate's finally managed to get you here. Something big has happened in Heaven Peak." Long Fei Yi squatted down. "What happened?" "Lockhart Yard, Scripture Yard, and Sword Yard betrayed us. They colluded with the evil sword school and attacked the peaks several months ago. They locked up Duanmu Yao and Master Kenshin in the dungeons," Chu Shifeng replied hastily. Although none of them had received a reply, they were still stunned by Chu Shifeng's words. "Where are the three venerable ones?" Long Fei Yi asked again. "The sect leader of the evil sword school personally ascended the mountain. None of the three honored elders were his match. The evil sword school wanted the three honored elders to help him subdue the Ganjiang sword, but the three honored elders refused. Even now, they're still hanging at the peak," Chu Shifeng replied honestly. The sect master of the evil sword school had always been mysterious and had never shown himself. But his swordsmanship is definitely not better than the three venerables from Tianshan Kenzo. How could he fight one against three and still win? Everyone exchanged glances before thinking of one person. Without a doubt, it was the man with exquisite swordsmanship who'd once disguised himself as Long Fei Yi to kill Gu Beiyue, Bai Yanqing. If it was that old fox who couldn't die, then it'd be easy to deal with the three honored elders. So Bai Yanqing was the sect master of the evil sword school. Han Yunshi said coldly. Before Heilian died, he told Long Fei Yi that Bai Yanqing had set up an ambush on Celestial Mountain. Heilian was Zhang Qiuzi's senior disciple and had been helping him secretly communicate with the evil sword school. He also knew that Long Fei Yi had the lustbite energy. Thus, Long Fei Yi and Han Yunshi suspected that Bai Yanqing was in cahoots with the evil sword school. They never expected that Bai Yanqing had long taken control of the entire evil sword school. After Bai Shanqing stepped down, he inherited the position of sect master of the evil sword school. Long Fei Yi was filled with doubts. In other words, Bai Yanqing had been in control of the evil sword school for a long time. In other words, Bai Yanqing had been lying in ambush on Celestial Mountain for a long time. What did he want the Ganjiang sword for? When did they attack the peak? Gu suddenly exclaimed. Last October, Chu Shifeng replied. When exactly was it? Do you remember the exact date? Han Yunshi grew anxious as well. Chu Shifeng thought it over, but couldn't remember the exact time. Still, he was certain of one thing, early October. It wasn't even the 15th of October yet. Long Fei Yi stiffened at his words. Han Yunshi and Gook gaped as well, unable to recover their wits. When they were at the medicine requesting cave, they had ridden to Celestial Mountain to ask about Phoenix energy. It had been between the end of October and the beginning of November. The sword sect master had been imprisoned in the prison since the beginning of the 10th month. In other words, their letters hadn't reached Kenzo at all, but ended up in Bai Yanqing's hands. It wasn't Kenzo himself who'd replied, but Bai Yanqing who'd imitated Kenzo's handwriting. This is bad. Gu looked at Long Fei Yi. Poison Lass has been exposed. It wasn't just about Phoenix energy, but Bai Yanqing had found out about their dual cultivation as well. Long Fei Yi looked at Han Yunshi, while Han Yunshi stared at Long Fei Yi with lingering fear. The worst thing is, all of our secret letters have been exposed, Han Yunshi muttered. By now, Han Yunshi's exposure wasn't so important anymore. More importantly, what was the deal with Phoenix energy? Could Han Yunshi continue her dual cultivation with Long Fei Yi now that she had Phoenix energy? Was it because of the power of the Phoenix that their dual cultivation failed? Back at the medicine requesting cave, the fake letter had said they could continue their dual cultivation, but they'd failed in the end. Bai Yanqing had clearly tricked them. What kind of good intentions did Bai Yanqing have? Currently, Long Fei had two sources of internal energy in his body, both of which were at the highest level. Meanwhile, Han Yunxi had the mysterious phoenix energy within her body. No matter which one it was, a single mishap could lead to the destruction of a person. If they hadn't decided to delay the northern expedition, they might still be in the dark about Bai Yanqing's plans. Or perhaps he'd have sent even more secret letters to Celestial Mountain. Long Fei Ye's secret letters to Celestial Mountain might have been guarded by specialized personnel, but no matter how tight the defenses were, it couldn't prevent the entire mountain from falling into enemy hands. When Han Yunxi mentioned the secret letters, Chu Shifeng quickly took out a letter from his robes, only to see that it had long been soaked in blood. Master, this subordinate has intercepted the letter. Long Fei Yi pulled the letter out of the blood-stained envelope and immediately recognized it as the last letter he'd sent to Celestial Mountain. It only told Kenshin's master that they were going up the mountain. Since Chu Shifeng had intercepted the letter, did that mean Bai Yanqing and the rest of the Evil Sword School students didn't know they were going up the mountain? Chu Shifeng was sprawled on the ground, propping himself up to answer Long Fei Ye's questions. Abruptly, his hands gave out and he collapsed to the ground. Han Yunxi finally noticed that Chu Shifeng's hands seemed to be badly injured as well. Long Fei Yi personally helped him sit up and said coldly, "Su Donglin, what are you spacing out for?" Su Donglin hastily turned around and sat next to Chu Shifeng, afraid that he'd have to support him. Long Fei coldly examined Chu Shifeng, his handsome brows knitting again. "How did you get down the mountain?" He had crippled Chu Shifeng's martial arts and killed the chicken as an example to the monkeys. Although he'd lost his position as head of the Shadow Guard, he hadn't suffered any more hardships on the mountain. Long Fei Ye's Shadow Guard had mostly been selected from Celestial Mountain's disciples. Some of them hadn't been selected from the ranks, but were sent here for training as well. There was a secret training ground for the Shadow Guard at the peak of Celestial Mountain that was directly subordinate to the head of the Shadow Guard. Long Fei Yi didn't have time to manage it personally. Chu Shifeng was the head of the Shadow Guard's training ground. He usually treated his subordinates well, so they wouldn't hit him while he was down. Moreover, once Su Donglin was crippled, Su Donglin took over as head of the Shadow Guard. With Su Donglin's protection, who would dare to do anything to Chu Shifeng? In other words, Chu Shifeng had been sent back to Celestial Mountain because Long Fei Yi had shown him mercy. Otherwise, he'd be killed as an example to the monkeys. Even if he didn't die, he'd suffer a fate worse than death. Long Fei Ye's question reminded Han Yunxi of something. Chu Shifeng had been living at the peak of Celestial Mountain all this time. His martial arts had been crippled, so it was the Shadow Guard who'd sent him up. How had he managed to escape the mountain? After all, the peak of Reserved Mountain was different from other peaks. It was both difficult to climb and descend, so Han Yunxi had a deep impression of it after walking past it once. If not for his lightness skills, it would have been impossible to leave Celestial Mountain, much less escape Evil Sword School's watchful eyes. That's right, how did Chu Shifeng get off the mountain if he didn't know martial arts? If the Shadow Guard had brought him down the mountain, he would have sent them a letter long ago instead of waiting for them to find this place. Chu Shifeng's ashen face was calm as he replied, "Master, this subordinate hid at the peak of Celestial Mountain for a long time. By the time the entire mountain was covered in snow, this subordinate rolled all the way down. This subordinate saw a flying eagle on the way down and stole the letter." Flying eagles to Celestial Mountain were different from returning letters, so he hadn't been able to send a letter back to his master. If not for the eagle filling his stomach and all the wild grass and plants in the spring, he would have starved to death long ago. His legs were crippled and his hands couldn't move. It was easier said than done to survive. Suddenly, everyone fell silent. Only the sound of Su Donglin sniffing could be heard. Ice and snow sealed off the path, freezing it to 3 feet deep. There was no way up Celestial Mountain in winter, but there was a way down. That was the road on the west side of the mountain. It was a very steep path that made it impossible to climb up or down without ice and snow. Once it was sealed off, it was possible to slide down and roll down. But no one had ever done this before. Everyone knew that it was a 9 out of 10 chance of dying. No wonder Chu Shifeng was covered in injuries. Both his legs were crippled and his hands were broken. No wonder Su Donglin hadn't been discovered by the evil sword school. Han Yunxi couldn't help but look towards the distant peak. She couldn't imagine what Su Donglin had experienced rolling down the mountain, or how many times he'd walked on the brink of death. In the silence, Chu Shifeng glanced at Han Yunxi before lowering his head. Master, this subordinate begs Master to record this subordinate's meritorious service. Let this subordinate make up for my mistakes. Before Long Fei Yi could speak, Han Yunxi said, Mingxiang, what are you spacing out for? Give me the medicine bag. Bailey Mingxiang recovered her wits and quickly fetched the bag from her horse. Gu Beiyue had given it to her before they left. Long Fei Yi, give me a hand. Flip him over so he's flat on his back. Han Yunxi added. Chu Shifeng was terrified. He'd served his master for so many years, but when had he ever let him do anything? He was at a loss for what to do when Long Fei Yi grabbed his arm. Chapter 1056. Long Fei Yi tugged at Chu Shifeng's arm, causing him to stiffen all over. Relax. Han Yunxi said. Chu Shifeng couldn't relax no matter what. Long Fei Yi seemed to sense his nervousness as well and stood up cold. Su Donglin, go give him a hand. Su Donglin's eyes were red and swollen. He obeyed Boss Chu's orders and didn't cry, but tears still welled up in his eyes. Besides disrespecting the princess on his own accord, Boss Chu had always been someone he admired and respected. In fact, he'd long treated him as his own big brother. He had been secretly rejoicing, thinking that he'd be able to see Boss Chu once they reached the peak of Celestial Mountain. He'd even been thinking of ways to persuade Boss Chu to give in to the princess and beg for her forgiveness. As long as the princess forgave him, His Highness wouldn't say a word. In the future, Boss Chu would still be a member of the Shadow Clan. Although Boss Chu didn't know martial arts, he had followed His Highness freely and knew more than anyone else in the Shadow Guard. Boss Chu could lead them all the same. But who knew he'd be injured to this extent? Han Yunxi examined him carefully and quickly concluded, both legs are crippled. Both calves suffered comminuted fractures. Too much time has passed, so we'll have to ask Gu Beiyue if they can be cured. Chu Shifeng lay on his back, too afraid to open his eyes. He didn't even dare to think about it, but he couldn't help but wonder if the princess had forgiven him. He always knew he was in the wrong. Acting on his own was a mistake, and a taboo as a shadow guard. But he never regretted it, because he couldn't forget the hatred of his ancestors. Until Su Donglin wrote a letter to Celestial Mountain and told him the truth about the Great Qin Empire's internal strife. Only then did he realize that all the hatred was a misunderstanding and that the princess was innocent. He was willing to accept His Highness's exceptions for her. Only then did he realize he'd made a mistake beyond redemption. After finding out the truth, he stopped writing to Su Donglin. He hesitated for a long time and wanted to go down the mountain to find the princess several times. He knew better than anyone else that as long as the princess agreed, His Highness would agree to anything. But he didn't. He lived day after day on the top of Mount Tianshan. Not for anything else, but because he thought he was already a cripple. How could a shadow guard without his martial arts be called a shadow guard? He even had to be carried down the mountain. It wasn't until the head of the Tianshan Kenzo top 3 schools and their disciples betrayed them, and the evil sword school attacked the top of Tianshan Mountain that he realized that he should do something for Her Highness. The top 3 schools had first taken control of the Shadow Guard training base before luring the people from the evil sword school to the top of the mountain. He wasn't at the training base at that time, so he managed to escape. No one paid attention to a cripple like him, which was why he could hide for so long. When the snow and ice blocked the road, they would slide down from the west side. Han Yunxi wrapped Chu Shifeng's arm and asked, "Does it hurt?" Chu Shifeng suddenly opened his eyes and met Han Yunxi's gaze. Subconsciously, he averted his eyes. "Does it hurt?" Han Yunxi asked next. "It doesn't," Chu Shifeng replied. Han Yunxi abruptly wrapped his arm. "How about this? I don't feel anything. When I went down the mountain, my right hand hit a rock and broke it. I tried to catch it myself, but I don't think I connected it properly," Chu Shifeng said honestly. Han Yunxi knitted her brows and didn't say a word. Instead, she checked his other hand, which was fine. After checking his bones, Han Yunxi began to press on Chu Shifeng's abdomen to check for internal injuries. As soon as she did, Chu Shifeng cried out in pain. How could a martial arts practitioner cry out in pain so easily? Unless the pain was really unbearable. Han Yunxi furrowed her brows while Su Donglin's eyes grew redder and redder. Long Feiyi watched from the sidelines, his expression growing colder and colder. By Yanqing, Evil Sword School, and the rebels from the 3 great colleges, he wouldn't let a single one of them off. Han Yunxi couldn't take it anymore by the end of her examination. She couldn't imagine how Chu Shifeng had endured so much pain and starved his readers until now. Not daring to delay any longer, she said, "Long Fei, he needs liquid hot food. Also, arrange for a carriage to send him to Gu Beiyue's place as soon as possible. Otherwise, I don't know if he'll be able to keep his life." Chu Shifeng looked spirited, but his internal injuries were very serious. Han Yunxi didn't know much about internal medicine, so the only thing she could do was ensure Chu Shifeng's safety and receive professional treatment as soon as possible. Boss, Su Donglin, who hadn't dared to speak this entire time, finally couldn't take it anymore as tears streamed down his face. Seeing this, Chu Shifeng immediately scolded, "Stinkin' brat, how much should I tell you?" Before he could finish, Long Feiyi cut him off. "Su Donglin," Long Feiyi said, "send a letter to Gu Beiyue and tell him to hurry over. Have Tang Li keep an eye on 3-way black market." Gu Beiyue would arrive much faster than Chu Shifeng. Moreover, they needed more people to climb Celestial Mountain. "Master, this subordinate is fine." This subordinate, Chu Shifeng was cut off again, this time by Han Yunxi. "You're still fine when you're already like this. Do you want to die? Fine, before you die, you have to clear your debt with this princess." Chu Shifeng gave a start at her words. He didn't know how to reply. Han Yunxi glared at him, looking a bit like a debt collector. Chu Shifeng fell silent before preparing to turn over. "What are you doing?" Long Feiyi asked unhappily. "Your Highness, this subordinate acted on his own initiative and was disrespectful to the princess." This subordinate will apologize to the princess," Chu Shifeng said with his head bowed. Han Yunxi felt her heart ache at the sight. How could there be right and wrong in anything? Now that she looked into it, what had Chu Shifeng done wrong? Who didn't remember the grudges of their ancestors? Who could be so submissive to their enemy? Lie down properly. Han Yunxi was fierce. She took out a pill from her medical pouch and said coldly, "Here, this is poison. Once you take it, you'll have to endure the pain of 10,000 ants gnawing at you for 2 hours. If you eat it now, I'll forgive you. From now on, we'll both forget about that incident. You can still be His Highness's servant like before and listen to my orders from time to time. How about it? Besides Chu Shifeng, everyone present could tell what the pill was. Su Donglin was so moved that he stopped crying and looked anxiously at Chu Shifeng, afraid that he'd refuse. Bailey Mingxiang was nervous as well. Chu Shifeng stared at the pill and didn't move. Long Fei Yi looked over as well. Everyone was waiting. As for Gu, he didn't have a good impression of Chu Shifeng at all. Back when he'd wanted to visit Poison Lass at the Duke of Qin's estate and give her some gifts, it had always been that damned brat Chu Shifeng and his shadow guard chasing after him. If not for the fact that Chu Shifeng had done meritorious service as a snitch, Gu would have killed him long ago. By now, Gu had already returned to the cave. Outside, Chu Shifeng had been thinking for a long time without making a move. It had to be said that Han Yunxi was a little disappointed by his lack of consideration. But Chu Shifeng only looked timidly at Long Fei Yi and asked in a low voice, "Will Your Highness forgive me too?" Han Yunxi couldn't help but laugh at his words. In the past, she'd felt that Chu Shifeng had turned into an old man after that incident. He was no longer the same person she knew. Still, Han Yunxi knew that he hadn't changed at all after hearing his question. Han Yunxi took the initiative to answer for Long Fei Yi. Of course. Naturally, Long Fei heard her, but he simply stood loftily on the sidelines without a word, tacitly agreeing. All right, I'll take it. Chu Shifeng was very decisive. He stuffed the pill into his mouth and chewed a few times before forcing it down. Everyone looked at him without saying a word. Chu Shifeng didn't speak either, but lay back down and exhaled in relief as he stared at the skies. Actually, he was terrified that he'd die a mysterious death before leaving Celestial Mountain. But now, even if he was poisoned to death, there was nothing to regret. Chu Shifeng quietly waited for the poison to take effect and the pain of 10,000 ants gnawing at him. Everyone else gathered around him in silence, waiting for the dragon pill to take effect. That's right, Han Yunxi's medicinal pills weren't poisons at all. Instead, they'd gone through all sorts of twists and turns and risked their lives multiple times to get the dragon pill back. There were only 2 left, one of which had gone back to Gu Beiyue. This was the last one. If Chu Shifeng knew the origins of these medicinal pills, what would he think? Would he still pursue the matter of right and wrong? Would he even need to ask whether His Highness and the princess would forgive him? Gradually, a warm current flowed from his dantian like a ball of true qi rising from his dantian and spreading throughout his body. As the energy coursed through his body, Chu Shifeng felt as if his cold, wounded body was being protected. He felt like he was being reborn. Now he was stunned. What's going on? He looked at Han Yunxi in confusion, but Han Yunxi had already risen to her feet. This isn't poison, but the dragon pill. Chu Shifeng, remember this, you'll always owe me a debt. In the future, serve me well. As Han Yunxi spoke, she headed back into the cave. She had to find a way to cook some hot food. Even if she had to wait for Gu Beiyue, she had to take care of Chu Shifeng's body as much as possible. Long Fei Yi followed her inside, leaving Su Donglin and Chu Shifeng outside. Once the 2 masters were gone, Su Donglin couldn't help but throw himself into Chu Shifeng's arms and sob. Boss Chu, you scared me to death. Sob sob, you can finally come back. Chu Shifeng stared blankly at the skies. Get the dragon pill back. Did I hear wrong? Boss Chu, His Highness and the rest almost lost their lives for the sake of getting the dragon pill back. The princess treats you very well. Don't fuss over the past, all right? Su Donglin was always like a child in front of Chu Shifeng. Very soon, Long Fei Ye's orders reached their ears. Why aren't you bringing them in yet? They were at the foot of Celestial Mountain. Although it was hidden, they couldn't afford to be careless. Since Bai Yanqing didn't know they were coming, they had to come up with a plan to kill them all and rescue Kenshin and the 3 honored elders so they could take back Celestial Mountain. Chapter 1057. Han Yunxi and the rest waited in the cave for Gu Beiyue to arrive while asking around for information on Tianshan Kenzo and the Evil Sword School. Actually, Long Fei Yi and Han Yunxi didn't think much of the Evil Sword School. Their main concern was whether or not Bai Yanqing was on the mountain. I've only seen the Evil Sword School's leader once. He had his face covered, and I saw him from a distance. I couldn't see his face clearly, Chu Shifeng thought back, then said with certainty, he should be over 50 years old. He's been on the mountain this entire time. Han Yunxi asked. Chu Shifeng couldn't be sure. I haven't seen him since they attacked the peak. Long Fei Yi glanced at Gu and said cold, you keep watch tonight. I'll go scout the way first. Chu Shifeng had limited information, so it was better to go up the mountain himself instead of making wild guesses here. You keep watch, I'll go. He'd already told Long Fei he was supposed to be a guard, but Gu Qishao had never listened to him properly. You've been up Celestial Mountain before? Long Fei Yi asked unhappily. Gu had no retort, but reluctantly replied, go ahead, I'll keep watch. Actually, Gu wasn't as smart as Han Yunxi, because Han Yunxi wanted to go as well, but she didn't say a word. Late at night, Long Fei Yi left. Han Yunxi tried to sneak after him. Gu quickly stopped her. Poison lass, it's dangerous. Han Yunxi looked back and gave him a pitiful, pleading look. Gu's heart immediately melted. Poison lass, hurry and chase after him. Otherwise, it'll be even more dangerous if you can't catch up. In this way, Han Yunxi quickly caught up with Long Fei Yi. Since she was already here, how could Long Fei Yi chase her away? Moreover, Han Yunxi was no longer a burden, but a capable assistant. There were a total of 5 mountains in the Tianshan mountain range. From the south to the north, it was like a staircase. One mountain was next to another, and each was higher than the last. The 5th mountain in the north was the Tianshan Mountain, and its peak was the peak of the Tianshan Mountain. Because of the terrain, there was only one way to reach the top of Sky Mountain. This road ran from south to north through the entire Tianshan mountain range. In short, to reach the top of Tianshan Mountain, one had to climb Mount Wuchong. The cave that Han Yunxi and the others were hiding in was on the shady side of the first mountain. At this moment, they had taken a detour to the front of the mountain. The only way to find out about the situation on the mountain was up there. Just like the first time they came here, Long Fei Yi hugged Han Yunxi's waist tightly and protected her in his arms. Perhaps Long Fei Yi was too familiar with this place, so he easily reached the first mountain with Han Yunxi under his protection. No one noticed them. However, along the way, he sensed that there were ambushes around them. Han Yunxi was puzzled. There were so many Tianshan Kenzo disciples. How did the Evil Sword School manage to control them? In terms of numbers, the Evil Sword School disciples were far inferior to the Tianshan disciples. Even if the 3 elders of the Sutra Pavilion, Hidden Sword Pavilion, and Lockhart Yard betrayed them, it was a matter of Tianshan Mountain. From the 1st to the 4th mountain, there were many branches of Tianshan Kenzo. These branches had a large number of disciples, and they did not belong to any pavilion or yard. How did the Evil Sword School manage to control them? How did they stop the news from spreading? Just as Han Yunxi was puzzled, the detoxification system gave her an answer. When Long Fei Yi brought her near the Meteor Sword Pavilion, the detoxification system issued a warning to Han Yunxi that there were many poisoned disciples in the pavilion. Poison attack. Han Yunxi muttered to herself. What's going on? Long Feiyi asked. Han Yunxi smiled. If you didn't bring me here tonight, we would have to go there again. When did the evil sword school become the 100 Poison sect? Long Feiyi immediately understood what was going on. If it wasn't for the use of poison, how could Bai Yanqing guarantee that he could control Tianshan Mountain in such a short time and seal off all news? Let's go in and take a look. It's too far away. I can't find out what kind of poison they've been poisoned with, Han Yunxi whispered. The Meteor Sword Pavilion was the largest sword pavilion in Tianshan Mountain's first peak. In recent years, it had produced many outstanding disciples. The reason why Long Feiyi chose this sword pavilion was because the pavilion master, Yin Yang, had a good relationship with Granny Yu from the commandment courtyard at the peak of Tianshan Mountain. They were like sisters. Most of the outstanding disciples in the Meteor Sword Pavilion had been promoted by Granny Yu. Very few of them entered the Hidden Sword Pavilion or the Scripture Pavilion, much less Lockhart Courtyard. Others might not tell the truth, but Yin Yang and Granny Yu were the same. They would definitely tell the truth and not betray Kenzo. Before she even entered, the detoxification system gave Han Yunxi an answer. Long Feiyi, it's the traceless poison. Han Yunxi said seriously. This poison can only be put in water. It will linger for a day before it activates. Once it activates, the victim will fall unconscious. If the poison isn't cured within 7 months, the victim will fall unconscious and die. Poisoning the water source was the most energy-efficient method. Even if they didn't drink water, they would still have to eat. In short, they couldn't live without someone. No wonder everyone was poisoned at the same time. Bai Yanqing wants to destroy Kenzo. Long Feiyi was alarmed. It had been 6 months since the 10th month of last year. In other words, if they had arrived a month later, all of the branches beneath Celestial Mountain would have been destroyed. No wonder the 2 depositories and 1 courtyard at the peak were working with the Evil Sword School. Back when Sangchosi was still the head of Lockhart Courtyard, the Scripture and Sword Pavilions had long conspired with him to form their own factions. Bai Yanqing's actions were exactly what they wanted. When Sangchosi and Duanmu Yao had colluded, Long Feiyi had severely injured him and locked him up in the dungeons. No one had ever been convicted, because once Sangchosi was convicted, Kenzo would have to investigate Han Yunxi's identity as a descendant of the poison sect. For the sake of protecting Han Yunxi, he'd had to endure Medical City's pressure to delay the trial. Back then, Kenzo had released news that the trial would be delayed until Long Feiyi inherited the position of sect head. Only then would Sangchosi, Duanmu Yao, and the rest be tried. Unfortunately, Long Feiyi had left the mountain and delayed the trial until now. But after Sangchosi was imprisoned, Kenzo hadn't promoted anyone from Lockhart Courtyard to the position of head. Instead, he'd let Sangchosi's disciples fight amongst themselves. Now it looked like there was no internal strife in Lockhart Courtyard. Long Feiyi and Han Yunxi had always assumed that Bai Yanqing would hide in the poison sect or northernly. They never expected Bai Yanqing to target Celestial Mountain instead. But they didn't understand why Bai Yanqing wanted the martial arts circles. Had he forced the 3 honored elders to subdue Ganjiang for the sake of Evil Sword School, or had other motives? Long Feiyi and Han Yunxi grew more and more puzzled. They snuck into Meteor Sword Depository and soon discovered that there were only 3 or 4 Evil Sword School disciples standing guard inside. Inside the Great Hall, more than 30 disciples were lying unconscious on the ground. Such weak defenses made it easy for Han Yunxi and Long Feiyi to sneak inside. For the sake of not alerting the enemy too early, they didn't kill any of the guards. The 2 of them landed on one of the beams of the Great Hall and looked down at the floor full of unconscious people. Is Bai Yanqing so sure that we won't go to Celestial Mountain? Han Yunxi asked doubtfully. He has control of all the secret missives, so it'll be easy for him to guard against us, Long Feiyi remarked. If Chu Shifeng hadn't stolen the missives, Bai Yanqing would have known they were going to Celestial Mountain half a month ago. Half a month was more than enough time for Bai Yanqing to set up an inescapable net. Thanks to Chu Shifeng's first-class merit. Han Yunxi grinned. She found a good vantage point and activated her detox system to do a thorough inspection. Even though she had already found out that he was poisoned when she was outside the hall, but for the sake of caution, she still kept an eye on him and checked him carefully. Be good and stay here. I'll go find Madame Yin, Long Feiyi murmured. This time, Han Yunxi was obedient. She'd just finished her inspection and confirmed that there was only one type of poison in the Great Hall when Long Feiyi returned. Madame Yin's in the back courtyard. There's someone watching over her, Long Feiyi murmured back. Let's go take a look first. Han Yunxi's eyes flashed with shrewd light as she came up with a plan. By the time Long Feiyi led Han Yunxi to Madame Yin, they couldn't get very close, but they could see her lying unconscious on a bamboo bed from a distance. There were 3 guards standing guard outside the door, including one from Lockhart Courtyard. Can you find out what kind of poison she's been poisoned with? Long Feiyi asked. Han Yunxi immediately gave him an answer. It's a never-ending poison. It's similar to traceless poison. Once poisoned, she'll lose consciousness. But the toxicity is much stronger. Someone must have poisoned her. You have an antidote? Long Feiyi asked. Long Feiyi shook his head. It's not the right time yet. Han Yunxi smiled. Then when is the right time? Call the poison guards over and join forces with Gu Beiyue to save her. When the time comes, we'll go straight to the top of the mountain, Long Feiyi said seriously. Han Yunxi looked at Long Feiyi and smiled foolishly. She was just about to do that. Since Bai Yanqing's defense at the foot of the mountain was so weak, there was no need for them to waste time here. It didn't matter if Bai Yanqing was at the top of Sky Mountain or not. They could just attack directly. If Bai Yanqing was here, then they'd fight to their heart's content. If Bai Yanqing wasn't here, then it'd be even better. The two of them had the same idea, so there was no need for further discussion. Han Yunxi smiled as she patted her medical bag. Don't worry, there's an antidote anytime. With Han Yunxi's words, Long Feiyi was of course completely relieved. After understanding the situation at Meteor Sword Court, Long Feiyi brought Han Yunxi to Heavenly Sea Court and the other sword courts. They spent the whole night walking through more than 30 sword courts in the first and second mountains. They found that all the sword courts were in the same situation as Meteor Sword Court. Whether it was the court master or the disciples, they were all unconscious due to poison. The poison in the court master and the disciple was different. If it were any other poison master, they would definitely go crazy if they had to check 6 different poisons in one night and make an antidote. However, this was a piece of cake for Han Yunxi. Han Yunxi didn't even need to remember it. The detoxification system automatically recorded it for her. The third and fourth mountains weren't easy to walk through. In order not to alert the enemy, they were very cautious. It took them 4 nights to walk through all the sword courts in the third and fourth mountains. As Han Yunxi predicted, the conditions on the third and fourth mountains were the same as the first and second mountains. Just like that, Han Yunxi and Long Feiyi spent 5 nights exploring half of Celestial Mountain and preparing their antidotes. Next, they waited for Gu Beiyue and the poison guards to arrive. Chu Shifeng was seriously injured and couldn't cultivate, so he could only rest and recuperate. Meanwhile, Han Yunxi used this time to calm down and cultivate her poison storage space. They assumed that Gu Beiyue would take at least 10 days to arrive, but who knew? Chapter 1058. Gu Beiyue's speed exceeded everyone's expectations. Less than 7 days after the letter was sent, he appeared before Han Yunxi and the rest. His white robes were still spotless, but his hair was disheveled and his face showed signs of fatigue. Even someone as calm as Long Fei Yi was stunned by Gu Beiyue's appearance. "How did you get here?" he asked. Gu Beiyue hadn't ridden a horse, but used lightness techniques to get here. He asked anxiously, "Where's Guard Chu? What's his condition now?" Only now did everyone realize why Gu Beiyue was in such a hurry. He was worried that Chu Shifeng's injuries would worsen. Chu Shifeng was lying on one side, blocked by everyone else. As soon as he heard Gu Beiyue's words, his heart clenched and he turned his head away. When had he ever hated or resented Gu Beiyue in the past? Han Yunxi and the rest hurried out of the way. As soon as Gu Beiyue saw Chu Shifeng, he strode over and crouched down on one side. Even though Chu Shifeng was staring at the wall, his first words were, "Guard Chu, I understand your situation now. Don't worry, I'll definitely treat you no matter what." Chu Shifeng looked back at him, at a loss for words. Gu Beiyue had already taken his hand and taken his pulse. Han Yunxi quickly explained the situation to Gu Beiyue, while Bailey Mingxiang and Su Donglin, who'd been taking care of Chu Shifeng, filled in the details. Han Yunxi stood on one side, looking at Gu Beiyue in silence. She couldn't help but think of a saying. "Like a person, like a rainbow, you'll know when you meet the top." How could there be someone like Gu Beiyue? He was always so warm and friendly to the people by his side. Sometimes, she really wanted to see Gu Beiyue lose his temper. After taking Chu Shifeng's pulse, Gu Beiyue carefully examined him and determined that both his legs were crippled. His left hand was fractured in 2 places and his internal organs were damaged. Fortunately, he'd taken the dragon pill. His true chi from practicing martial arts was slowly recovering to protect his body. Otherwise, Chu Shifeng would be beyond saving by the time he got here. Gu Beiyue hastily took out the medicine he'd prepared beforehand and reapplied medicine to the wounds Han Yunxi and Bailey Mingxiang had helped Chu Shifeng. She wrote a few more prescriptions and instructed Su Donglin, he must start taking the medicine within 7 days, 3 prescriptions a day. Combine it with acupuncture. "Dr. Gu, I'm fine. Just prescribe me some medicine and I'll be fine. Don't delay His Highness's important matters," Chu Shifeng said hastily. If he wanted to use acupuncture, he would have to delay Gu Beiyue's time. His Highness and the princess were still waiting for him to ascend Celestial Mountain. Gu Beiyue looked towards Bailey Mingxiang. "Miss Mingxiang, do you remember the acupuncture techniques I taught you before you ascended Celestial Mountain?" Bailey Mingxiang gave a start before nodding. "I've always remembered." "Dr. Gu, don't worry. Mingxiang will take good care of Guard Chu." "Princess, since news of our dual cultivation has been leaked, Miss Mingxiang doesn't need to risk her life with us up the mountain. Why don't we have her take care of Guard Chu?" Gu Beiyue asked. "Besides you and her, I won't be at ease with anyone else taking care of him," Han Yunxi said. "This isn't a place to stay for long. Let's send them off first, then discuss our plans for ascending the mountain." Gu Beiyue looked towards Long Fei Yi. In the end, Long Fei Yi had to make the final decision. Long Fei Yi had no objections. "Su Donglin, find a few people to escort them to Crescent Moon Manor. Keep a close eye on Chu Tianyin and wait for further orders." Crescent Moon Manor wasn't far from Western Zhou's imperial capital. It was one of Long Fei Yi's other mansions in the Western Zhou desert. There were a few small springs in the manor. Spring water gushed out all year round, nourishing a large patch of greenery. When Long Fei Yi bought the manor, it was the beginning of the month. When the crescent moon shone on the spring water, he changed the name of the manor to Crescent Moon. Chu Tianyin still hadn't found out why Western Zhou's Emperor Kongqing had been in the limelight during the 100 Poison Sect incident. There was also no news of Mu Qingwu. Long Feiyi was naturally dissatisfied with this. If he hadn't been so busy recently, he would have gone to see Chu Tianyin in person. Yes, your subordinate understands. Su Donglin was very happy. This way, he could take care of Boss Chu. Such an arrangement seemed to be very appropriate. Gu, who had been silent all this time, was looking at the prescription. No matter how he looked at it, he found it strange. This prescription didn't require acupuncture. Gu Beiyue was clearly lying. Gu's eyes darted around, but he didn't expose Chu Tianyin on the spot. Your Highness, Princess, take care. Bailey Mingxiang bowed respectfully. At this moment, her feelings were complicated. She felt a sense of relief, but she couldn't bear to part with them. Long Feiyi ignored her. He lowered his head and whispered something into Gu Beiyue's ear, but she didn't know what to say. Han Yunxi smiled. You guys be careful too. After Bailey Mingxiang and the others left, Gu pulled Gu Beiyue over and whispered, "There's something wrong with your prescription and acupuncture, right?" "There shouldn't be, right?" Gu Beiyue smiled. "Definitely. That prescription doesn't need acupuncture." "I'm sure of it," Gu said. "Seventh young master, let's talk about this after we save Mulinger. We have important matters to discuss now." Gu Beiyue didn't argue and cleverly stalled for time. Given Gu's personality, he would have forgotten about it if it wasn't for Poison Lass. Gu Beiyue had done it on purpose. His goal was obviously to send Bailey Mingxiang away. Bailey Mingxiang couldn't see through him, but he could see through Bailey Mingxiang. No one knew what Su Xiaoyu had done in the Duke of Qin's residence, but it couldn't escape his eyes. Today, he had personally sent Bailey Mingxiang away. He knew that he would have to leave one day. Gu Beiyue turned around and said seriously, "Your Highness, Princess, in this one's opinion, there's no need to wait for the poison guards. Let's take action tonight." Seeing Han Yunxi and Long Feiye's surprise, he calmly added, "This one hasn't had a chance to use my shadow arts properly since I recovered. I hope that your Highness and Princess will give this one a chance. If you hand over all the sword garrets on 4th Mountain to this one will definitely not disappoint you." Long Feiyi liked people who were straightforward the most, and this kind of person was exactly what he lacked. He was in a good mood and said with a smile, "If your princess is willing to give you all the antidotes, this crown prince naturally has no objections." Han Yunxi couldn't help but laugh. It wasn't easy for Long Feiyi to say the words, "your princess." She readily handed over a large bag of antidotes. There are a total of 55 sword garrets, and each of the garrets is poisoned with a different poison. There are about 30 disciples in each garret, and the poisons are all the same. I've made all the antidotes into pills and marked them clearly. Han Yunxi handed over the antidotes and added, "Gu Beiyue, you should consider this carefully. It won't be easy to complete all 55 garrets on 4th Mountain. After alerting the enemy, if you aren't fast enough, you will be in big trouble. Princess, please don't worry. After this subordinate completes this task, this subordinate will immediately meet you at the top of Heaven Mountain." Gu Beiyue cupped his fists and bowed. Unlike his usual calmness, his words were especially powerful this time. No matter how Gu looked at it, he felt that Long Feiyi, Poison Lass, and Gu Beiyue were very harmonious and had a tacit understanding. He felt that he had to say something, otherwise he would be isolated. He quickly hooked his arm around Gu Beiyue's shoulder and said with a smile, "Brother, then we'll wait for you at the top of the mountain." But Gu Beiyue whispered beside him, "Seventh young master, if Bai Yanqing is at the top of the mountain, please protect the princess well." Gu was slightly taken aback. Only then did he realize that he might be the main character of this trip. He quickly came back to his senses and agreed readily, "Don't worry, I'm here." That night, Long Feiyi, Han Yunxi, Gu, and Gu Beiwei worked together for the first time and sneaked into Heaven Mountain. Long Feiyi and Han Yunxi were dressed in purple and looked extraordinarily noble. Gu was dressed in red robes and looked as coquettish as fire. Gu Beiwei was dressed in white and looked as elegant as an immortal. In the misty mountain forest, the four figures chased after each other at high speed. They flew soundlessly like a dream and a fantasy, calling themselves a scene. After ascending the first mountain, Gu Beiwei landed lightly on the mountain. Han Yunxi and the rest turned back to look, but Gu Beiwei waved with a smile, indicating that they didn't need to stay any longer. After Han Yunxi and the other two figures disappeared into the night, Gu Beiwei looked up at the moon, as if trying to determine the time. At this moment, the gentleness and indifference on his face had disappeared. His eyes were as cold as ice, and when such a clean face became serious, it actually caused one's heart to tremble. His entire being was so cold that he was like an azure that had no temperature and no emotions. He was so cold that he was extremely sharp. He slowly turned around and looked at Meteor Sword Pavilion. In an instant, he disappeared into thin air. Previously, Han Yunxi and Long Feiyi didn't need to climb to the top of the mountain to scout. They only needed to circle around the mountain forest, so they didn't encounter the guards at the mountain passage. This time, they were heading directly to the top of Heaven Mountain and would naturally encounter the guards. Between the first and second mountains was a bamboo bridge, between the second and third mountains were stone swords, and between the third and fourth mountains were stone swords. When Han Yunxi went up Heaven Mountain for the first time, she encountered difficulties at the bamboo bridge. Long Feiyi and the disciples of Sword Pavilion at the foot of the mountain helped her cross the bridge. Han Yunxi had a very deep impression of them. This time, there were no obstructions to ask them to follow the rules of Heaven Mountain, only the guards. They didn't avoid the path they had to pass, but killed them. Facing Kenzo's defense, not to mention Long Feiyi, even Gu could deal with it. But it was Han Yunxi who'd killed them without a sound or trace. She used poison needles. Just like Long Feiyi's sword that slit the throat, she could kill with a single needle. Soon, they arrived at the fourth and fifth mountains, which were the top of Heaven Mountain. They were connected by a chain bridge. To reach the peak, they had to cross the bridge. But unlike the guards at the foot of the mountain, there were 2 rows of guards at the end of the bridge. One row was made up of swordsmen from Evil Sword School while the other was made up of disciples from Lockhart Courtyard. Long Feiyi recognized the Lockhart Courtyard disciples at a glance. They were all sword experts personally taught by Zhangqiuzi. A few other people were sitting in a pavilion on the side of the bridge. Han Yunxi's eyes were sharp enough to spot a familiar face. She smiled and said, "Long Feiyi, your future sister-in-law is there too." That's right, the person Han Yunxi recognized was Zhangqiuzi's daughter, the eldest young miss of Lockhart Courtyard, Zhangqiuying. Chapter 1059. After all these years, Zhangqiuying still looked as dainty and beautiful as ever. She didn't seem bothered by her father's affairs or the changes in Lockhart Courtyard. If Han Yunxi guessed right, Zhangqiuying had played a huge part in keeping Lockhart Courtyard from falling into chaos after Zhangqiuzi's imprisonment. Women were born leaders. Once they led men, they could lead the world as well. Long Feiyi, are we going to kill our way over? Or? Gu muttered. Their previous defenses had been weak and few people, so they were able to sneak up without alerting anyone. But things were different here. Once they made a move, the entire mountain would be alerted. But before Long Feiyi could answer, Han Yunxi strode out. She had been filled with anticipation the first time she'd climbed Celestial Mountain, only to run into Tsang Qiuying on the first peak. That woman not only blocked her way, but even tattled on her to Granny Yu. Because of that, Tsang Qiuying had run into trouble before she even reached the peak and met with old Kenzo. She hadn't gotten rid of Tsang Qiuzi last time, but she hadn't gotten her revenge on Tsang Qiuying yet. Han Yunxi wasn't here for revenge this time, but she was more than happy to do it while she was at it. Moreover, they had no other way to reach the peak besides killing their way out. As soon as Han Yunxi stepped out, Long Feiyi followed closely behind, followed by Gu. "Who's there?" Tsang Qiuying and the rest looked over, only to freeze at the sight of Long Feiyi and Han Yunxi. How did they climb Celestial Mountain? How did they manage to reach this place without alerting the people below? Didn't the head of Evil Sword School promise her before he left that Long Feiyi and Han Yunxi wouldn't come to Celestial Mountain in the first 6 months of spring? In half a year, the poison left behind by the Evil Sword School's master was enough to force the 3 venerables to subdue the ancient sword, Ganjiang. Tsang Qiuying didn't know why the Evil Sword School master was so certain of Long Feiyi and Han Yunxi's whereabouts. However, the Evil Sword School master was able to deal with 3 venerables, so she naturally trusted him. Tsang Qiuying wasn't stupid. She immediately whispered to the people beside her, "Quickly send a message to the sect master. Tell him that Long Feiyi and the others are here. Also, I'll stall for time here. Hurry up to the top of the mountain and tell Gong Beiqin." Gong Beiqin was none other than the eldest disciple of the Evil Sword School's headmaster. His talent was extraordinary, and his swordsmanship was exquisite. Compared to Heilian, he was even better. Almost everyone in Evil Sword School believed that Gong Beiqin would definitely inherit the position of Evil Sword School's sect leader in less than 10 years. Other than sect leader by Shanqing, Gong Beiqin would be the youngest sect leader in the history of Evil Sword School. As soon as Tsang Qiuying walked out of the pavilion, the 2 guards immediately left from behind her. "Long Feiyi, Han Yunxi, long time no see. What wind blew in Heaven Mountain today that brought you here?" Although Tsang Qiuying was flustered, she forced a smile. She didn't dare to look at Long Feiyi. Her gaze landed on Han Yunxi. Her father had lost all his martial arts and was locked up in a prison cell. He died from his serious injuries. All of this was caused by Long Feiyi and Han Yunxi. Especially Han Yunxi. If this woman hadn't appeared, her father wouldn't have forced Long Feiyi so close, and the tragedy of the ranking tournament wouldn't have happened. At this moment, although she was smiling at Han Yunxi, she already treated Han Yunxi as her father's murderer. The reason she colluded with Evil Sword School was to fulfill her father's dying wish to lead Lockhart Courtyard to independence. Secondly, she wanted to borrow the power of Evil Sword School to avenge her father. She hadn't obtained the treasured sword Ganjiang yet. No matter what, she had to stop Han Yunxi and Long Feiyi to buy more time for Gong Beiqin. Even if Evil Sword School's sect leader wasn't at the peak, Gong Beiqin had the 3 supremacies and Li Kenshin as hostages. As long as he was prepared, he wouldn't be afraid of Long Feiyi. Although Tsang Qiuying was fully prepared, when she saw Long Feiyi's hand around Han Yunxi's waist, she couldn't help but feel heartache. If only her father didn't have any thoughts of betrayal. If only Duan Muyao was imprisoned and her father didn't suffer along with her. How great would that be? If Duan Muyao was crippled, then she'd have a chance. Although she'd settled for second best and followed heretical sword sect's Gong Beiqin, her heart couldn't help but throb at the sight of Long Fei's divinity. This man was no longer Tianning's Duke of Qin, but East Qin's crown prince. West Wind. Han Yunxi replied coldly. Tsang Qiuying didn't understand Han Yunxi's meaning, but Long Feiyi and Gu knew that Han Yunxi was referring to Chu Shifeng. If they didn't beat them to a pulp today, the first person they'd let down would be Chu Shifeng, who'd risked his life to come down the mountain. West wind. Tsang Qiuying laughed out loud. Why didn't I sense it? Han Yunxi, you didn't come uninvited, did you? Han Yunxi only smiled coldly without a word. Tsang Qiuying was trying to think of a way to stall for time when Han Yunxi didn't speak. She was happy to do the same. After a while, Han Yunxi really didn't say a word. Long Fei Yi and Gu didn't speak either. But gradually, Tsang Qiuying began to feel guilty. Just what does Han Yunxi mean by this? What does she want to do by wasting time like this? Have they already reached the peak of Celestial Mountain? Tsang Qiuying couldn't figure it out no matter how much she thought about it. The more she thought about it, the more flustered she felt. Finally, she couldn't help but ask, Han Yunxi, just what do you want? Han Yunxi arched a brow at her before smiling disdainfully. She didn't answer. When Han Yunxi was arrogant, she was overbearing and domineering. Perhaps only Long Fei Yi could suppress her domineering aura. Under her disdain, Tsang Qiuying felt more and more guilty. She felt a sense of inferiority. No. Tsang Qiuying was shocked. How could she have such a feeling? Shame could turn into anger, and guilt could turn into anger. She questioned loudly, Han Yunxi, just what do you want? Eldest young Miss Tsang, my husband and I are returning to our sect. What right do you have to question me? We're happy to stand here. What does it have to do with you? Tsang Qiuying always felt that she had a sharp tongue and was eloquent. But when she met Han Yunxi, she couldn't even win a round. Tsang Qiuying stared at Han Yunxi's white teeth and thin lips. She secretly thought that if Han Yunxi fell into her hands one day, she would cut off Han Yunxi's tongue first. Tsang Qiuying snorted disdainfully. Then just you wait. There was only one path to the peak of Celestial Mountain. Let them waste their time. Tsang Qiuying comforted herself. However, Han Yunxi wasn't done speaking. She chuckled and said, as for why Gu came to Celestial Mountain, why don't you ask him? Only then did Tsang Qiuying realize that the handsome man in red standing behind them was the rumored medical city Shaoqi, Gu. Gu didn't put Tsang Qiuying in his eyes at all. When Han Yunxi said this, he looked at Tsang Qiuying seriously and said lazily, you want to talk to this young master with this kind of trash? You! Tsang Qiuying was furious. At this time, the 2 Lockhart Yard disciples she sent away came back. They were 2 handsome young men, but when they came back, their faces were full of wrinkles. It was as if they had aged a few decades in an instant, turning into old men. Eldest young miss, save us. Eldest young miss. Eldest young miss, are we poisoned? Save us. The 2 ran in front of Tsang Qiuying in horror and begged with their faces covered. The contrast between his soft and tender hands and his wrinkled face made Tsang Qiuying and the others' hair stand on end. Tsang Qiuying had seen such aged faces from Duanmu Yao before. This, aging overnight. Tsang Qiuying looked at Han Yunxi in disbelief. She finally realized what Han Yunxi was waiting for. She was waiting for the poison to take effect. When did she poison them? She was so far away. How could she poison them without them noticing? Tsang Qiuying had secretly made plans. If she couldn't hold off Han Yunxi, she would provoke Han Yunxi into a duel. Han Yunxi was trash. No matter how good her martial arts were, she couldn't get close to her, so she couldn't poison her. However, Han Yunxi was clearly using these 2 disciples to warn her. When did this woman learn martial arts? Tsang Qiuying began to feel afraid. She couldn't help holding her cheeks. Seeing the faces of the 2 disciples in front of her made her want to vomit. She didn't dare to imagine if her face became like this, would she go crazy? No, she had no choice but to retreat. Her face was filled with fear. Protect eldest young miss. The one who spoke was Tsang Qiuying's second senior brother. He pulled out his sword and stepped forward. But the moment he stepped forward, his face immediately hurt. He touched it and felt several wrinkles. My face. He was shocked and looked at the people around him. Everyone around him was shocked. They could clearly see that the wrinkles on his face were slowly increasing, and his face was slowly becoming wrinkled. He was also poisoned. Heavens, how did Han Yunxi poison him? Han Yunxi was holding the poison needle that Long Fei Yi had ordered for her. She walked step by step towards Tsang Qiuying. Tsang Qiuying's senior brothers originally wanted to protect her, but when they saw what happened to their second senior brother, they suddenly stopped. As Han Yunxi approached, they all retreated and avoided her. Tsang Qiuying turned to escape. She no longer cared about Heaven's Peak. Her face was more important than anything. Unfortunately, Gu Qishao soon landed in front of her to block her way. Tsang Qiuying immediately fled to the right, but Gu Qishao blocked her again. She fled to the left, but Gu Qishao blocked her again. As for Long Fei Yi, he watched from the side, letting the surrounding disciples escape and sneak attack Han Yunxi. He had always disdained to make a move on women. Finally, Han Yunxi stopped in front of Tsang Qiuying. She was holding a poison needle and playing with it with interest. Tsang Qiuying fell to the ground in fright. Han Yunxi was helpless. Boring. Was she too strong or was her opponent too weak? Just as Han Yunxi was about to squat down and question Tsang Qiuying about Heaven's Peak, Tsang Qiuying hurriedly said, Han Yunxi, back then you didn't know martial arts. It was Long Fei Yi who helped you up Heaven's Peak. Now that you know martial arts, why don't we have a competition today? Let's see who crosses the suspension bridge first. If you win, I'll take your needle. If you lose, I'll never go up Heaven's Peak again. Do you dare? Han Yunxi laughed out loud. That's so pointless. Why don't we? Chapter 1060. What did Han Yunxi want to do? Tsang Qiuying waited in trepidation. No matter what, as long as Han Yunxi agreed to compete with her, she still had a chance. Who knew that Han Yunxi would say, how about this? Take a needle from me. If you can cross the bridge before the poison takes effect, I'll help you detoxify. If you can't cross the bridge, then I'm sorry. Tsang Qiuying was shocked and angry. Why? Because. Han Yunxi shrugged and stepped back. She smiled and pointed at Tsang Qiuying's abdomen. Because, you're already poisoned. Eldest young Miss Tsang, you don't have much time left. Tsang Qiuying was horrified and hurriedly looked down at her abdomen. She really saw an extremely small poison needle in her abdomen. One night's twilight. Han Yunxi kindly reminded. No. Tsang Qiuying's beautiful face turned pale. She didn't have time to argue and immediately flew toward the iron chain bridge leading to Mount Wuchong. Han Yunxi looked back at Long Fei Yi. Seeing that Long Fei Yi had no intention of stopping her, she flew after Tsang Qiuying. Seeing this, the dozen or so Lockhart Courtyard disciples all rushed to block Han Yunxi's way. The heretical sword sect disciples at the end of the bridge lined up in a row to block Han Yunxi's path. One of the disciples turned back and shouted at Tsang Qiuying, eldest young Miss Tsang, run. Go tell young Master Gong. Who knew that as soon as his voice fell, he suddenly fell to the ground powerlessly. As soon as he fell to the ground, his eyes closed and he lost consciousness. Everyone was shocked. They had all seen the poisoned disciples at the foot of the mountain and could immediately tell that this disciple was poisoned. But how did he get poisoned? Han Yunxi was clearly so far away. And how did the two disciples who were poisoned by one night's twilight just now get poisoned? Even if Han Yunxi knew martial arts, she shouldn't be so strong, right? Zhang Qiuying's martial arts weren't bad. In a short while, she had already flown across half of the iron chain bridge. Everyone was extremely nervous. Whether Zhang Qiuying could detoxify the poison or not was not important to them. Whether Zhang Qiuying could successfully reach the top of the mountain was the key. Han Yunxi's cold gaze swept across the crowd. Suddenly, she leaped into the air, both of her hands holding poison needles. The poison needle technique she'd used just then was called Shadowless. It was one of the most difficult and powerful of all of Long Fei's personal needle techniques. The techniques and moves were developed by Chang Feiyi, while the needles were specially made by Tang Li. The shadowless needles were silent and formless. Usually, the enemy would not even realize that they were hit by the needles. Han Yunxi had only tried one needle at a time. She had never tried multiple needles at once. Today, there was a chance for her to join forces. She didn't mind giving it a try. She hovered in midair, silently counting the number of people in her heart, silently anchoring her target. Before she could make a move, several disciples from Lockhart Academy rushed over with swords. Han Yunxi immediately retreated. Seeing this, the disciples thought that she was afraid and were overjoyed. The people behind her also attacked together. Han Yunxi narrowed her cold eyes and continued to retreat. Seeing that the disciples from Lockhart Academy had the absolute upper hand, the disciples from Evil Sword School immediately flew over and guarded the right side against Long Feiyi and Gu. One of the disciples whispered, "Quick, kidnap her." They knew very well that they couldn't beat Long Feiyi. However, if Han Yunxi wanted to die, they would fulfill her wish. As long as they could kidnap Han Yunxi, it would be equivalent to controlling Long Feiyi. Zhang Qiuying was running for her life, while Han Yunxi was surrounded by a dozen or so sword-wielding disciples. Meanwhile, Long Fei and Gu Qishao were being guarded against by a dozen heretical sword sect disciples. This made Gu Qishao very unhappy. He suddenly shouted, "Poison lass, what are you dawdling for? Do you need help?" Han Yunxi glanced at him and smiled without saying anything. She continued to retreat. "Get into formation and kill." A disciple shouted. In an instant, 10 disciples spread out with their swords. The sword chi was sharp and the sword light was bright. It formed a sword chi circle that surrounded Han Yunxi. The disciples by Zhang Qiuying's side naturally wouldn't be weak. Feeling the sword chi behind her, Zhang Qiuying looked back and immediately felt relieved. She looked worriedly at Long Feiyi and Gu, afraid that the two men would chase after her. Who knew that Long Feiyi and Gu seemed to have forgotten about her and didn't even look at her? Long Feiyi's cold face was particularly serious. His gaze didn't leave Han Yunxi for a moment. Gu stroked his chin with a playful expression. He also stared at Han Yunxi. She was clearly running away, but at this moment, Zhang Qiuying suddenly hoped that Long Feiyi or Gu would look back at her. She even hoped that they would chase after her and stop her. Even she herself was shocked by this thought. Coming back to her senses, she borrowed the strength of the iron chain bridge and continued to run forward. Zhang Qiuying never thought that there would be a day when she couldn't obtain Long Feiyi's love and even his hostility. Just how pitiful was she? The sword chi around Han Yunxi became more and more intense. More than 10 disciples formed a circle. It was unknown who gave the order, but all of them raised their swords and slashed down at Han Yunxi, who was trapped in the middle. Han Yunxi had nowhere to run. The sword chi and sword chi were so intense that the disciples of Evil Sword School looked back again. Zhang Qiuying couldn't help but look back again. This was the most powerful sword formation in Lockhart Courtyard. With 13 swords attacking together, Han Yunxi would definitely die. However, they didn't see the blood splatter as they expected. What they saw was that the 30 swords stopped 3 inches away from Han Yunxi's body. All the sword chi and sword chi dissipated. Suddenly, the 30 disciples of Lockhart Courtyard all fell to the ground and fainted. They were all hit by an extremely thin poison needle in their heads. For a moment, everyone was stunned. At such a close distance, didn't the disciples of Lockhart Courtyard know to dodge when Han Yunxi used her needles? With their abilities, they should be able to dodge. How could this be? Damn it! The disciples of Evil Sword School turned around and attacked. This time, Han Yunxi didn't use the invisible needles. She clenched her fists and waved fiercely. In an instant, several needles flew out and flew towards the disciples of Evil Sword School. The speed of the needles wasn't slow and could be seen with the naked eye. The disciples of Evil Sword School raised their swords to block. The disciple closest to Han Yunxi used his sword to block the poison needle accurately. But who knew that although the poison needle looked ordinary, its strength was astonishing. Clang! After the collision, the poison needle actually pierced through the sword blade and went straight for the person behind the sword. The person was stabbed in the eye by the poison needle. He cried out in pain and fell down. When the surrounding people saw this, they didn't dare to block the needles and dodged in all directions. There were a few people who couldn't dodge in time and ended up in a similar situation. They all fell unconscious. Han Yunxi was no longer smiling. Her phoenix eyes were cold and stern, making people not dare to look at her directly. She was in midair with one hand behind her back and the other hand raised fiercely. In an instant, several poison needles shot out. Unlike the previous round, the poison needles were very fast this time. They were like a dream or an illusion. Everyone only saw a shadow pass by, and by the time they recovered, the poison needles were already in front of them. It was too late to dodge. Just like that, more than 10 disciples of Evil Sword School were poisoned by the needles one after another. Some screamed in shock, some cried out in pain. Some didn't even have time to recover before they fell from the sky and fell unconscious. Zhang Qiuying turned around at some point. She was so shocked that she forgot to run. She had watched for so long and only saw Han Yunxi raise her hand twice to deal with more than 20 sword experts. Not to mention her sinister and precise needle techniques, just her internal energy alone was frightening. Without the support of powerful inner strength, she wouldn't be able to use that kind of power, let alone that kind of speed. Zhang Qiuying thought of a saying. A true expert would never use more than 3 moves. Wasn't this talking about Han Yunxi? Han Yunxi landed gracefully and used the ground as a stepping stone. She then soared into the air and flew towards Zhang Qiuying. Her body was as light as a swallow as she flew over. Her purple robes fluttered and she was as beautiful as a fairy that had fallen into the mortal world. Poison Lass is so beautiful. Gu couldn't help sighing. Long Fei Ye's lips curled into a satisfied smile. His line of sight followed her silently without disturbing her. This should be the first time Han Yunxi fought alone after learning martial arts. She didn't look like a newbie at all. Her 2 moves and a few needles were completed beautifully. Seeing Han Yunxi chasing after her, Zhang Qiuying regained her senses. She broke out in cold sweat and hurried forward. Han Yunxi reached down and grabbed at the air, immediately picking up the sword from the ground. She landed steadily on the iron chain of the iron bridge and slashed elegantly with her sword. She soared into the air and the bridge broke. Zhang Qiuying didn't step on the bridge and this sword didn't seem to have much effect on her. But just as the iron chain bridge fell into the abyss, Han Yunshi held the sword with both hands and suddenly slashed forward. Han Yunshi, you can't do this. You're going back on your words. Tsang Qiuying was alarmed, thinking that Han Yunshi was going to attack her directly. But she was wrong. Han Yunshi's sword was like a rainbow, its sword chi capable of toppling mountains and overturning seas as it struck the falling iron chain bridge. The wooden planks on the iron chain bridge were suddenly lifted up by the powerful sword chi and flew up, smashing towards Tsang Qiuying. Tsang Qiuying finally saw Han Yunshi's intention, and in a moment of desperation, she finally realized that she could resist. She didn't escape but drew her sword and slashed at the wooden planks flying over. Han Yunshi's lips curled into a sneer as she flew from the side and soon landed on the opposite cliff. She watched Tsang Qiuying deal with the wooden planks. She had to admit that Tsang Qiuying's swordsmanship was worthy of admiration. But Han Yunshi still kindly reminded her, "Eldest young Miss Tsang, you don't have much time left." Tsang Qiuying was immediately distracted when a large wooden plank smashed towards her back, causing her to cry out in pain. She didn't care about being smashed and anxiously flew towards Han Yunshi. Just as she was about to approach, Han Yunshi took a step back and spread out her hands. Her palms were filled with poison needles. She smiled at the frightened Tsang Qiuying and the power of the phoenix erupted from her palms. The poison needles flew in front of her and formed a poison needle barrier at the edge of the cliff. Tsang Qiuying stopped abruptly and didn't dare to approach. Chapter 1061. Time passed. Tsang Qiuying stood on the edge of the cliff, facing a wall of needles, not knowing what to do. Han Yunshi stood behind the wall with her arms crossed, calm and composed. Tsang Qiuying held her sword with one hand and caressed her face with the other, angrily saying, "Han Yunshi, what are you trying to do? It seems that eldest Miss Tsang doesn't want the antidote." Han Yunshi said helplessly. Tsang Qiuying angrily swung her sword at the wall of needles, but who would do that? There was a powerful force hidden between the needles. Tsang Qiuying's fierce sword actually couldn't disperse the needles. Han Yunshi stood motionless, silently counting in her heart. Based on the amount of poison used, the effects of the poison would be different in 1 night and 1 year. Tsang Qiuying didn't believe in heresy and swung her sword again, but her sword actually bounced back. Tsang Qiuying began to feel afraid and frantically slashed. Han Yunshi smiled, "Eldest Miss Tsang, how about this? Answer a few of my questions. If I'm satisfied, I'll give you the antidote. How about it?" Tsang Qiuying immediately stopped. "What questions? How's my martial arts?" Han Yunshi asked. "You're an expert. You're stronger than me," Tsang Qiuying said without hesitation. Han Yunshi shook her head. "That's flattery, not the truth. Your internal energy is very strong. Your needle technique is strange and varied, vicious and accurate. You can be considered an expert. Not many disciples of Sky Mountain are your match." Tsang Qiuying spoke the truth. However, Han Yunshi still shook her head. "It doesn't sound good." "You..." Tsang Qiuying racked her brains. Even when Duan Muyao was here, she didn't flatter her like this. Thinking of Duan Muyao, Tsang Qiuying hurriedly said, "Your martial arts are stronger than Duan Muyao's. You'll definitely defeat her in 3 moves." Han Yunshi immediately narrowed her eyes. "Eldest Miss Tsang, you're comparing this princess to a trash." Tsang Qiuying's internal energy was gone. This was an open secret. Tsang Qiuying realized she had said something wrong, but she really didn't know how to answer Han Yunshi to satisfy her. She kept touching her face and was so anxious that she was about to cry. Finally, she asked angrily, "Han Yunshi, what do you want me to say?" Han Yunshi just looked at her without saying a word. Gu Beiyue and Gu had already fallen to the side. They were very curious. What kind of answer would satisfy Han Yunxi? Long Feiyi, if it were you, how would you answer? Gu whispered. Long Feiyi ignored him. Gu snorted in disdain. I knew that a poker face like you wouldn't know how to make a woman happy. Long Feiyi was expressionless as he said, no matter what this crown prince says, she will be happy. Gu pursed his lips and didn't speak to Long Feiyi for a long time. At this time, Zhang Qiuying suddenly understood and said anxiously, Han Yunxi, it was all my fault that you went to Celestial Mountain last time. Zhang Qiuying instinctively reached out to grab the antidote, but Han Yunxi casually threw it down the cliff. Answer my question and then chase after them. If you answer quickly, you might be able to get it back. Otherwise, I can guarantee that even the sect master of heretical swords sect who knows how to use poison wouldn't be able to cure you. Zhang Qiuying looked into the abyss, but she couldn't see the antidote anymore. The abyss was unimaginably deep. Since the founding of Tianshan Kenzo, no one had been able to reach the bottom. The longer this dragged on, the lower the antidote would fall. Even if she chased after them, she wouldn't be able to get back up. Han Yunxi wasn't that easy to fool. If she didn't explain everything clearly, it would drag on for a long time. But if she did, then everything would be over. Han Yunxi's lips quirked up into a cold smile as she waited patiently. Zhang Qiuying was defeated in the end. The people from Zhuchong Hall were poisoned. The three supremacies were also poisoned. The disciple of Evil Sword School's sect master, Gong Beiqin, is personally guarding the top of Heaven Mountain. There are hidden swords and poisonous insects. I heard from Gong Beiqin that Ganjiang is. At this point, Long Feiyi and Gu became alert. But who knew that just as Zhang Qiuying was about to continue speaking, several sharp arrows suddenly flew at them from behind. Be careful. Long Feiyi anxiously reminded Han Yunxi. Han Yunxi naturally knew. She pulled Zhang Qiuying and immediately flew away from the cliff to avoid the arrows. Long Feiyi and Gu also retreated to the side. Several arrows missed their target, and a man flew down from the clouds with several archers. The man was quite handsome and wore an enchanting red robe. His every movement was flirtatious. If Gu wasn't here, this man would be quite pleasing to the eye. But Gu was right beside him. The two of them were like the clouds in the sky and the mud on the ground. This red-robed man not only wore clothes similar to Gu Qishao's, but had a similar personality as well. The moment he came over, he didn't even look at the people on both sides. He directly pointed his sword at Han Yunxi. Bitch, who are you? I order you to release eldest Mist Song immediately. Otherwise, you'll have to bear the consequences. Han Yunxi could be considered experienced and knowledgeable, but she was frightened by the man's domineering tone. She even felt that it had been a long time since Long Fei spoke to her so domineeringly. Han Yunxi immediately looked at Long Feiyi. Sure enough, Long Feiyi's naturally cold face immediately turned cold. As for Gu, he seemed to be in a good mood. He was rubbing his chin and sizing up the man in red with interest. Who is he? Han Yunxi whispered. Zhang Qiuying was already in despair. He's Gong Beiqin. Han Yunxi, I've told you everything I know. I beg you, let me go. What's the hurry? Han Yunxi whispered. It was obvious that this Gong Beiqin didn't recognize the three of them. Bear the consequences. Han Yunxi laughed. What do you mean? You're courting death. Gong Beiqin was furious. He arrogantly raised his hand and several archers behind him scattered in all directions, their bows ready to shoot. Long Feiyi and Gu clearly couldn't take it anymore. Just as they were about to come over, Han Yunshi raised her hand to signal them not to come over. The arrows weren't poisonous, but the poison in each arrow was the same. Playing with poison with her was simply courting death. This time, the man in red looked at Long Fei Yi and Gu and snorted. No hurry. Wait until this young master takes care of this bitch, then I'll take care of you. Heavens, just how arrogant was this guy? Was he so arrogant that he didn't have a brain? Long Fei Yi and Gu were completely ignored for the first time. Han Yunshi thought that this guy would be very capable, but who knew that he only ordered his men to shoot? Han Yunshi grabbed Sang Qiuying and evaded the arrows with a few dodges. At the same time, she collected the poison from the arrows into her poison storage space. Once he sensed that the poison in the air had disappeared, Gong Beichen was shocked and looked at Han Yunshi in disbelief. I'm here to court death. Han Yunshi mocked herself. Gong Beichen said angrily, Sang Qiuying, who exactly is she? Sang Qiuying was so disheartened that she didn't want to bother with Gong Beichen. The man she loved was snatched away by Han Yunshi, and the man she had to settle for couldn't even beat Han Yunshi. What was this? Without waiting for Sang Qiuying's reply, Gong Beichen felt uneasy. He immediately blew a whistle and soon, a large group of archers attacked from the top of Heaven Mountain, surrounding Han Yunshi. So many. Han Yunshi was shocked. Gong Beichen was overjoyed. Bitch, tell me your name. If you surrender, this young master can spare your life. Gong Beichen, you don't have the right to know who I am. Han Yunshi broke out in cold sweat. Shoot! Gong Beichen said fiercely. In an instant, thousands of arrows were shot, all rushing towards Han Yunshi. However, no matter how fast or fierce the arrows were, they all disappeared into thin air once they got close to Han Yunshi. Gong Beichen was stunned. He didn't believe it. Shoot! Quick, shoot! However, no matter how many arrows the archers shot, they all disappeared without exception. In the end, the archers ran out of arrows. They were all dumbfounded, thinking that they had encountered a ghost. Who exactly are you? Gong Beichen was shocked as he pulled out his long sword. When the sword was unsheathed, the sword light was so strong that it hurt people's eyes. Han Yunshi was surprised. This guy's swordsmanship seemed to be quite powerful. Chapter 1062. I'm your grand-aunt. Han Yunshi answered Gong Beichen bluntly. Since he was so stupid that he couldn't guess their identities, there was no need for them to know each other. When Gong Beichen drew his sword, Han Yunshi shot out 2 poisonous needles, aiming for Gong Beichen's vitals. Han Yunshi used the shadowless needles, but Gong Beichen sensed it immediately. He turned sideways and dodged the 2 poisonous needles with a wave of his sword. This fellow was indeed the eldest disciple of the evil sword school. Although he was a little stupid, his martial arts were not to be underestimated. Although Han Yunshi might not lose in a real fight, Han Yunshi didn't want to compete with him in martial arts. Han Yunshi wanted to play poison with him. After the 2 golden needles were knocked down, Han Yunshi shot out another 4. This time, it wasn't the shadowless needles, but the power and speed were on par. They flew towards Gong Beichen with great momentum. Gong Beichen felt the power of the poisonous needles and was shocked. He didn't take it head-on, but hurriedly dodged. He leaped into the air and flipped over. The poisonous needles flew past his feet before he landed back down. But the moment he landed, he saw another poisonous needle flying towards him. Gong Beichen jumped in fright. He instinctively leaned back, and the poison needle flew past him, brushing past his body. It's poisonous! Gong Beichen exclaimed. He immediately realized that the poisonous needles had scattered poisonous powder when they flew past. He held his breath and retreated far away. And this kind of poisonous powder was even more powerful than the one he had just scattered with the arrows. Your poison skills aren't bad. Han Yunxi sneered. She was just testing him and immediately realized that this fellow's poison skills weren't bad either. It seemed that Bai Yanqing had taught him poison skills. Perhaps he would know his master's true identity. After the poisonous powder scattered, Gong Beichen spoke. You are. He thought of a woman who was very afraid of poison skills. But he definitely didn't believe that woman would come to Heaven Mountain. Besides, that woman didn't know martial arts. Master said that woman wouldn't come to Heaven Mountain for at least half a year after spring. It was also because of this that his master had given him Sky Mountain and wanted him to obtain Ganjiang as soon as possible. Usually, there would always be people from unorthodox sects who would come to Mount Tianshan to provoke them. God knows where these people came from. I already said that I'm your great aunt. If you call me grand aunt, I'll let you go. How about it? Han Yunxi's phoenix eyes contained a smile. She was lofty and magnificent. Bitch, this is Sky Mountain. If you have the ability, then compete with me in swordsmanship. If this young master loses, you can do whatever you want with me. Do you dare? Gong Beichen said provocatively. His swordsmanship was much stronger than his poison skills, and this woman seemed to only know how to use poison needles. She didn't even have a sword. If he were to compete with her in swordsmanship, he had a high chance of winning. Han Yunxi snorted and asked loudly, Miss Tsang, is this evil sword school's young master usually such a coward? Do you only dare to fight women? Tsang Qiuying's heart crumbled. She lowered her head and didn't answer. Bitch, what did you say? Gong Beichen was furious. I said you're a coward. You only dare to provoke a woman like me. If you have the guts, then fight them. Han Yunxi chuckled as she pointed at Long Fei and Gu Qishao. Just find one of them to fight. If you really have the guts, then have both of them come at you together. Do you dare? When Tsang Qiuying heard this, she couldn't help but chuckle. She had forgotten her position. This was probably the biggest joke she had ever heard in her life. Gong Beichen then looked at Long Fei Yi and Gu. Long Fei Yi's handsome appearance and Gu's devastatingly beautiful appearance made his heart tremble. However, he quickly ignored it. He had been talented since he was young. He started learning swordsmanship at the age of 3. When he was 10, he was able to fight 1 against 10, becoming a genius in evil sword school. When he was 15, he was the leader of the evil sword school's younger generation. Whether it was swordsmanship or inner strength, he was number 1. Today, no one in evil sword school was a match for him. He was even on par with the Nirvana 6th-stage elders at the peak of Heaven Mountain. Other than Elder Kenzo's disciple, Long Fei Yi, no one in Heaven Mountain was his match. Ha! This young master disdains to fight with you. Gong Beichen slowly moved his sword and pointed at Long Fei Yi and Gu. He said arrogantly, then the two of you will fight me together. Let's be straightforward. Long Fei Yi looked over coldly without batting an eyelid. Gu suddenly looked frightened. He hurriedly ran towards Han Yunxi and hid behind Han Yunxi. You guys can fight me one-on-one. I surrender. Gong Beichen glanced at Gu and scoffed. Long Fei Yi glared fiercely at Gu. He was clearly dissatisfied. However, he still flew over and landed in front of Gong Beichen. Watch my sword. Gong Beichen immediately attacked. Who knew that Gu would suddenly shout, Long Fei Yi, help me destroy his clothes first. I feel uncomfortable just looking at it. Gu felt that other than himself, every man in the world who wore a red robe looked especially ugly. Long Fei Yi did not move, but Gong Beichin stopped abruptly. He was shocked. What did he just hear? Long Fei Yi. Before Gong Beichin could react, Long Fei suddenly drew close and kicked him viciously in the mouth, sending him flying through the air. You're courting death by scolding this prince's woman. Long Fei Yi said coldly and suddenly closed in. Gong Beichin's mouth was crooked from the kick. As he fled, he looked at Han Yunxi in disbelief. This woman was actually Han Yunxi. Han Yunxi, whose poison skills were comparable to Master's. No. How could this be? Before Master left, he clearly told him that Long Fei Yi and Han Yunxi would not be coming to Tian Shan in the short term. Master also said that Long Fei Yi and Han Yunxi were at three-way black market, preparing to go to Tiger's prison to save people. At the same time, they were busy preparing for the Northern Expedition. The Northern Expedition was such a big matter. Master would definitely not make a mistake. How could they appear here? Gong Beichin could not accept this fact. However, Long Fei Yi was already closing in and kicked again. He could not avoid it and could only fight. Using all the strength in his body, he swung his sword at Long Fei's leg. In a flash, the sword reached tens of thousands of zhang, its sword chi shattering everything in its path as it swept through the mountains and overturned the seas. How much disdain did Long Fei Yi have for Gong Beichin? In the face of such a strong sword aura, he did not even draw his sword. He did not even dodge. His eyes were cold and his face was as cold as an azura. He faced the dazzling sword and continued to kick Gong Beichin. Why did this guy not dodge? Did he have a death wish? Gong Beichin was in disbelief. However, he soon saw Long Fei Yi pass through the sword aura unscathed. An extremely strong force exploded from his body, shattering the sword aura that filled the sky. What was that force? Why was it so domineering and terrifying? Was it the lustbite force that Master mentioned? Gong Beichin was dumbfounded. Long Fei Yi's leg was already closing in. Without hesitation, he kicked him in the mouth. This time, he did not kick him away. Instead, he kicked him to the ground. Bang! Gong Beichin hit the ground and felt that all the bones in his body were about to break. He looked up, his mouth and chin completely crooked. Long Fei Yi followed and stood behind him. Long Fei Yi, strip. Strip. Take off your clothes. Gu Qishao shouted. Han Yunxi's mouth twitched. Why did these words sound more and more dirty? Gu, are you sure you didn't do it on purpose? Regardless of whether Gu did it on purpose or not, his words finally attracted Long Fei Yi's attention. Long Fei knitted his brows as he looked at him. Immediately, he flashed his signature smile. Long Fei, strip him of his clothes. Long Fei Yi did not say a word. He pulled Gong Beichin up and threw him at Gu. It was so fast that Gong Beichin did not have time to poison him. Gong Beichin took advantage of the situation and scattered a handful of poison powder in Gu Qishao's face. Gong Beichin grabbed this poison from his sleeve in a moment of desperation. He did not even realize that this poison was an aphrodisiac. Gu knew with a sniff. Han Yunxi was even more clear. The two of them looked at Long Fei Yi at the same time. They had the same thought. They were all curious as to whether Long Fei's frozen face would crumble if he was poisoned. He avoided Gong Beichin and wiped his face. He looked at Han Yunxi. Poison girl, stop looking. The one poisoned is me, Chi brother. The antidote, hurry. He was not like Han Yunxi, who could concoct the antidote anytime and anywhere. Although he was immune to all poisons and diseases, he still had to pretend in front of Poison Girl. Actually, it was not a deliberate act. He was already used to it. Since Bai Yanqing was not at the top of Heaven Mountain, he had dodged a bullet this time. He could continue to pretend to be crazy and slack off. In any case, Long Fei was more than capable of dealing with these clowns. He was someone who was going to do great things. Han Yunxi then realized that Gu had been poisoned with an aphrodisiac. She turned around and smiled brightly at Gu. "Skin him and I'll cure you." Gong Beichin, who had fallen to the side, was so frightened that his face turned green. Gu Qishao only laughed out loud. "Poison lass, Qi Gij likes you more and more." Gu smiled evilly and immediately walked towards Gong Beichin. Gong Beichin was kicked twice by Long Fei Yi and suffered severe internal injuries. He crawled up and ran away. Gu chased after him and grabbed a corner of his red robe. He yanked it hard and immediately tore half of his skirt. Gong Beichin did not care about his favorite red robe being torn. He used his qinggong and flew towards the top of Heaven Mountain. He shouted, "Men, stop him! Stop him!" The archers who had lost their arrows immediately surrounded Gu and stopped him. Han Yunxi grabbed Sang Qiuying and watched the show with a smile. Long Fei Yi looked expressionlessly at the top of Heaven Mountain, deep in thought. Gu wanted to slack off, but he became the busiest one. A thorny vine flew out of his sleeve and caught up with Gong Beichin. It wrapped around his body and pulled him back. The archers had no other weapons in their hands, so they could only use their bows as weapons to attack Gu Qishao. Gu Qishao found them too annoying and abruptly flung out his vines. All of the thorns on the vines shot out at the surrounding archers. The archers could not dodge in time and were poisoned. Although Gong Beichin could withstand the poison of the thorny vine, he could not break free from Gu's thorny vines. He was quick-witted and slashed the thorny vines with his sword, escaping in the end. It had to be said that if Gu did not use Immerse's sword spirit, he would not be Gong Beichin's match in terms of martial arts. This made Gu Qishao very unhappy. With a dashing wave of his hand, he tossed out several thorny vine seeds. As soon as the seeds landed on the ground, countless thorny vines shot into the sky at lightning speed, wrapping around Gong Beichin in an instant. Gu Qishao shouted domineeringly, "Tear for this old man." So. Chapter 1063. As a result, the vines wrapped around Gong Beichin scattered, each of them tearing a piece of cloth from his body. The poison and antidote hidden in Gong Beichin's clothes fell to the ground and scattered all over. Gong Beichin's sword also fell to the ground. Just like that, Gong Beichin's flashy red clothes were torn to shreds. Even his inner and undergarments were not spared, leaving only a pair of underwear. If not for Poison Lass's presence, with Gu's personality, how could he have left Gong Beichin with just a pair of underwear? The vines hooked onto strips of cloth, showing off in the air, just like their owner, arrogant and insufferably arrogant. Looking at the vines tied to his underwear, Gong Beichin's face flushed red, either from fear or embarrassment. Sang Qiuying glanced at him. Her already broken heart was almost destroyed. The only thing she was clear about was that Han Yunxi and the rest did not know about her relationship with Gong Beichin. Gu soared into the air and hurriedly handed over the only antidote in his hand. "Gu, the poison in your body is about to act up. I'll give you the antidote, let me go." The only red-robed man by Long Fei and Han Yunxi's side was Gu Qishao. Gong Beichin still had this bit of common sense. Who knew that Gu would kick away Gong Beichin's antidote and say angrily, "Who wants your antidote?" It was rare for him to have the opportunity to eat the antidote personally concocted by Poison Lass. Whoever dared to spoil his plans, he would get angry. Gong Beichin was a little dumbfounded. He only felt that Gu was like a monster. Gu rubbed his chin and said playfully, "Which skin should I peel off first?" Gong Beichin was really frightened. If it were anyone else, he would have taken it as a threat. Facing Gu, he only felt fear. Just as Gu was about to make a move, an incomparably miserable cry suddenly came from the top of Heaven Mountain. Long Fei Yi and Han Yunxi immediately recognized Master Kenshin's voice. Long Fei Yi immediately flew to the top of Heaven Mountain. Han Yunxi grabbed Sang Qiuying and chased after him. Gu pulled Gong Beichin along as he chased after them, shouting, "Poison lass, the antidote. Where's the antidote?" Han Yunxi was no longer in the mood to joke with him. She immediately threw a pill over. However, Gu hid the pill in his sleeve and did not take it. As soon as they reached the top of Sky Mountain, they were shocked by the scene before them. On the towering stage, the Kenshin old man was tied to a huge rack. His body was covered with whip wounds, and there was a shocking scar on his chest. It was caused by a red-hot iron. In the past, this injury was nothing to the Kenshin elder. But now, Kenshin had lost all of his internal energy. His body was no different from an ordinary old man's. How could the old Kenshin bear such an injury? He had already fallen into a coma. Seeing this scene, Long Fei Ye's eyes burned with rage. He was about to draw his sword when 3 black-robed elders flew down from the top of Jiuchong Palace and landed in front of the Kenshin elder. Gong Beichin saw this and realized that he had hostages in his hands. In fact, he did not have to be afraid of Long Fei Yi and Han Yunxi. He hurriedly shouted, "Master, save me! Save me! Uncle Master!" It turned out that these 3 black-robed elders were the elders of Evil Sword School. Evil Sword School cultivated evil martial arts and could easily go berserk. Even the elders' martial arts were limited and not very good. The trouble now was that they had hostages in their hands, and there was more than one. Seeing that Gong Beichin was only left with his underwear, the 3 elders were very shocked and furious. They also knew of the commotion below, which was why they tortured Kenshin and lured Long Fei Yi and the rest up. Of course, they knew that Gong Beichin was no match for Long Fei Yi and the rest, but they did not expect Gong Beichin to be so weak and humiliated to such an extent. He was a disgrace to Evil Sword School. Great Elder angrily held his sword to Kenshin's neck and said loudly to Long Fei Yi, "Let Gong Beichin go, or you'll have to collect your master's corpse. Don't you dare." Long Fei Ye's anger shot out from his cold eyes, and Great Elder did not dare to look straight at him. However, with hostages in their hands, what did he have to be afraid of Long Fei Yi? Let's see if old man dares to. As soon as the head elder finished speaking, he made his move. But Long Fei's whip was even faster than his sword. Just as his blade was about to pierce Li Jianxin's neck, Long Fei had already lashed out with his whip. The tip of the whip was sharp and as fast as lightning, catching everyone off guard. The Great Elder's sword was forcefully shattered. This, in the world of martial arts, speed was the only thing that could not be defeated. To be fast, one had to have strong inner strength to support a powerful explosive force and speed. Everyone was shocked, and they were all dumbfounded. Including Han Yunxi and Gu. They knew that Long Fei Yi used the Lustbite power, but they did not expect it to be so strong. If the dual cultivation succeeded, wouldn't Long Fei Yi be invincible? Sang Qiuying looked at Long Fei Yi from afar, her heart aching so much that she could not breathe. Why did such an outstanding and powerful man not belong to her? Why? Gong Beichin was frightened by Gu, but he was completely convinced by Long Fei Yi. He could not help but imagine how terrifying it would be if Long Fei Yi pulled out his sword. Everyone gave a start, but Long Fei didn't give the head elder any time to react. He abruptly raised his whip and lashed it at him. Great Elder subconsciously retreated. The moment he retreated, Long Fei Yi immediately flew over. It was too late for Second Elder and Third Elder to chase after him. He could only watch as Long Fei stood by Li Jianxin's side. When Long Fei Yi stood there, they knew that they had lost their hostage, Kenshin. No wonder the sect master only dared to leave Heaven Mountain after confirming that this guy would not come. This guy made people submit to him. The three elders did not care about Gong Beichen and Sang Qiuying. They immediately flew to Jiuchong Hole. Long Fei Yi smashed the rack with his palm and shouted angrily, "Gu, come here." Seeing Long Fei Yi's angry look, Gu was frightened. Without thinking, he dragged Gong Beichen and rushed over. He threw Gong Beichen aside and hurriedly supported Kenshin. His sect was invaded and his master was imprisoned. How could Long Fei Yi not be angry and anxious? Even so, he did not forget Han Yunxi. He reached out to Han Yunxi and said coldly, "Come here." Han Yunxi grabbed Sang Qiuying and flew to the stage. She pushed Sang Qiuying to Gong Beichen, who had fallen to the side. She hurriedly grabbed Long Fei Yi's hand and flew to Jiuchong Hall with him. Gu Qishao finally recovered his wits as he watched them leave. Why was I so obedient to Long Fei's words? When Long Fei Yi and Han Yunxi went to Jiuchong Hall, Lockhart Courtyard, Scripture Depository, and a group of Evil Sword School disciples flew down from the surrounding palaces and surrounded Gu and the two hostages. Gu was already in a bad mood. Seeing so many people watching him, he was even more unhappy. Seeing the people around him approaching, he glared fiercely. "If you come any closer, I will take off Gong Beichen's pants." When he said this, all the disciples of Evil Sword School stopped in their tracks. The disciples of the courtyard and two pavilions looked at each other, not daring to move forward. Only then did Gu calm down. He tied up Sang Qiuying and Gong Beichen with thorny vines and sat on the steps casually, pulling on the thorny vines. It was too difficult to drag these two people to Jiuchong Hole. He had to think of a way to get rid of these two hostages before he could chase after Long Fei Yi and Han Yunxi. Gu's face was ugly as he thought of a way. The surrounding disciples looked at him, waiting for him to act rashly. Useless thing. Sang Qiuying couldn't help but scold Gong Beichen. "Bitch! Why didn't you tell me earlier that you knew their identities? What kind of good intentions do you have?" Gong Beichen questioned. "You're the one who's ignorant." Sang Qiuying despised Gong Beichen. She didn't even know how she had put up with it back then. "Gu, let me go and I'll definitely tell you where the supremacy hid them." Gong Beichen didn't want to surrender. However, what if Gu really pulled down his pants in front of everyone? How would he have the face to continue staying in Evil Sword School? Since Gong Beichen had surrendered, Sang Qiuying said anxiously, "Gu, only one of the three supremacies is in their hands. The other two are in the hands of the Hidden Sword Pavilion and Hidden Scripture Pavilion elders. Help me detoxify and I'll definitely tell you." The poison hadn't acted up yet, but her heart was still clenched. Even if she fell into Han Yunxi's hands, she didn't want to end up disfigured. Gu's eyes lit up. "You mean the three supremacies aren't in Jiuchong Hole?" "Exactly." Sang Qiuying rushed to answer. "Gu only knows the whereabouts of one of the supremacies. I know too. Kill him and help me detoxify. I'll definitely bring you to them." Sang Qiuying. Gong Beichen was furious. "I really regret cooperating with Evil Sword School. You can't do anything right." Sang Qiuying said coldly. "This young master must have been blind to fall for an ugly freak like you." Gong Beichen said loudly. The moment he said this, the entire place fell silent. Gu couldn't help but curse. Fuck, what kind of taste do you have? Although the surrounding disciples knew that Gong Baichen had hooked up with Mist Sang in order to cooperate with Lockhart Courtyard, they were still shocked to hear Gong Baichen say it himself. Everyone was still very surprised. The disciples of the Hidden Sword Pavilion and Hidden Scripture Pavilion sneered in disdain. The disciples of Lockhart Courtyard were embarrassed and angry. A few of them actually started fighting. Zhang Qiuying wanted to kill herself. She never thought that her ending would be so similar to Duan Muyao's. At this moment, 3 black-clothed elders suddenly escaped from Jiuchong Hole. Without a doubt, Long Fei Yi and Han Yunxi had broken through their ambush and knew that the supremacies weren't imprisoned in Jiuchong Hole. Seeing the chaotic scene of the disciples arguing, the black-clothed elders all stood on the side of the Evil Sword School disciples. Long Fei Yi and Han Yunxi landed beside Gu. Long Fei Yi asked, "What's going on?" Before Gu could answer, Zhang Qiuying burst into tears. "I was wrong. I made a big mistake. I know where the supremacies are imprisoned. I'll bring you there. I'll bring you there right now." She was so afraid that Long Fei Yi would find out about her affair with Gong Baichen. This was her last dignity. Now that Long Fei Yi and Han Yunxi were here, Long Fei Ye's martial arts were above everyone else's when he left. Now that he was even stronger, they would only be asking for trouble if they didn't surrender. Second Elder ignored the Evil Sword School and said to Long Fei Yi, "As long as you destroy these bastards from the Poison Sect and cripple Lockhart Courtyard, my Sword Pavilion and the Scripture Pavilion are willing to hand over the 2 venerables and help you ascend to the position of sect head." TSK TSK TSK. Han Yunxi sighed inwardly. How was Second Elder surrendering? Was he trying to tempt or threaten? But where did he get the confidence to tempt Long Fei Yi? And where did he get the courage to threaten Long Fei Yi? Long Fei Yi was expressionless and didn't say a word. Evil Sword School's first elder and the other 2 elders exchanged glances, realizing that the situation was dire. If Evil Sword School refused to budge and Long Fei Yi agreed to Second Elder's demands, wouldn't Evil Sword School become the target of public criticism? Left with no choice, Evil Sword School's first elder spoke up. "Long Fei Yi, we won't interfere in Tianshan Kenzo's internal affairs. Release Gong Baichen and Old Man will immediately invite the 3rd venerated elder out. We'll write this matter off." Evil Sword School and the 2 pavilions elders had both expressed their intentions to reconcile with Long Fei Yi. Wouldn't Lockhart Courtyard be in for a tragedy? Zhang Qiuying was so desperate that she couldn't care about anything else. At this moment, Zhang Qiuying's 4th senior brother stood up. "Long Fei Yi, if you want to see Granny Yu again, expel Evil Sword School from Tianshan Mountain and cripple 2nd Elder and 3rd Elder, these 2 hypocrites. Lockhart Courtyard's disciples are willing to serve you forever." Hearing this, Han Yunxi only smiled coldly in her heart. So this group of people's cooperation was so fragile. Both sides had hostages, so why didn't they unite and fight to the death? But reality proved that it was useless even if they were united. Because even if they tried to curry favor and make concessions, Long Fei Yi wouldn't be willing to accept. What's more, there was a hidden threat in their words. Long Fei Yi looked at them and retorted coldly, "What right do you have to negotiate with this crown prince?" Everyone was shocked. They didn't expect Long Fei Yi to be so arrogant as to reject them. Everyone unsheathed their weapons. Second Elder couldn't believe it and asked, "Long Fei Yi, do you really not care about the supremacy's life or death? Those who can't protect Tianshan Mountain are all trash. Why should this prince care about them?" Long Fei Yi said as he slowly pulled out his profound frost sword. The moment the profound frost sword was unsheathed, it emitted a dazzling sword light. Long Fei Yi hadn't even made a move and his sword had already intimidated everyone. At this moment, everyone present was truly united. They formed groups of 3 to 5 and covered each other. They were on high alert and held their swords tightly, ready to deal with Long Fei Yi's attack at any time. At this moment, Evil Sword School's first elder shouted, "Leave Han Yunxi and Gu to the 3 of us. You guys surround and attack Long Fei Yi." With that, Long Fei Yi's sword stabbed backward, right into Gong Beichen's heart. He pulled out his sword and blood splattered everywhere. Han Yunxi and Gu hurriedly dodged. Seeing this, Zhang Qiuying seemed to have realized something and looked at Long Fei Yi in disbelief. However, before she could say anything, Long Fei Yi's sword slashed across Zhang Qiuying's neck. Just like that, Zhang Qiuying's eyes widened. Until her death, all she saw was Long Fei Yi's back. He didn't turn back. Everyone was intimidated by Long Fei Yi's ruthless actions. Those 2 people were his hostages and he actually killed them just like that. What else could threaten him? While everyone was panicking, Long Fei Yi handed the profound frost sword to Han Yunxi and said indifferently, "Hold it well and follow me to kill the enemy." Long Fei Yi used his scabbard as a sword and the way he held the scabbard was shocking. "As you command, Your Highness," Han Yunxi said loudly. She held the sword and pointed it to the sky. 10th level Nirvana realm power rushed from her palm to the profound frost sword, causing it to shine brightly once again. More than half of the people present cultivated the Nirvana realm power. Even the people from Evil Sword School who didn't cultivate the Nirvana realm power were familiar with it. They all recognized that it was the Nirvana realm power and were all stunned at the same time. Who would have thought that the former trash Han Yunxi had already cultivated the full level of the Nirvana realm power? Even the elders of Heavenly Mountain hadn't been able to do it until now. In other words, other than Long Fei Yi, Han Yunxi's internal energy was the best. Heavens! This woman, everyone didn't know what to say. Other than shock, there was more shock. Seeing Long Fei Yi and Han Yunxi so dazzling, how could Gu be willing to be ordinary? He kicked away Gong Beichen's corpse and stood up. "Count me in. Today, I'll kill to my heart's content." After he said that, he raised his hand handsomely and brought out Mo's sword spirit. The sword's shape couldn't be seen, but the sword's shape could be seen. The sword's light was faint, but it contained boundless power. Mo's sword spirit. Heavens, it's Mo's sword spirit. Mo's sword spirit has appeared. Evil Sword School's great elder exclaimed. While the sect master was looking for the treasured sword Ganjiang, he was also looking for Mo's sword spirit. Mo's treasured sword was already destroyed, but the sword spirit's power was still not to be underestimated. Gu actually controlled Mo's sword spirit. If not for the head elder's shout, no one would know what kind of treasure Gu Qishao's invisible sword was. Hearing the head elder's words, they were all stunned speechless. Which swordsman didn't know Mo's Ganjiang? Long Fei Yi, Han Yunxi, and Gu, the 3 of them stood back to back, each holding a sword. Their sword energies were different, but they were all so powerful that no one dared to underestimate them. The people surrounding them all retreated, and no one dared to take the lead. At this moment, Gu Beiyue stood on the side of the palace, quietly watching this scene. His white robe fluttered, and his black hair danced. He smiled, and his gaze was gentle. He stood aloof from the world, unmoved by honor or disgrace. He was a spectator, and also a protector. He had already settled everything at the foot of the mountain and had come up long ago. He had already searched more than half of the mountain peak, and was only resting here to take a look at the princess's dazzling, noble, and magnificent appearance. Even though he missed her, he didn't hesitate and quickly disappeared into thin air to continue his search. What was Gu Beiyue's heart made of? How warm was it, and how cold was it? Long Fei Yi, Han Yunxi, and Gu hadn't even made a move, but they had already crushed the morale and fighting spirit of everyone present. The disparity in strength was so great that many disciples began to flee in all directions. Soon enough, a large group of people had fled down the mountain. Waiting for them were the disciples of the 55 depositories of the fourth peak, as well as Granny Yu and the abstinence courtyard disciples who had already rescued Gu Beiyue. Second elder wanted to flee, as did the 3 elders of the evil sword school, but Gu and Han Yunxi separated to stop them. Long Fei Yi faced them directly. Second elder was so shocked that he was the first to kneel and surrender. Fei, for your master's sake, spare your martial uncle this time. He's willing to. Long Fei Yi looked down at him from high above and said coldly, not everyone has the right to surrender to this crown prince. So speaking, the scabbard slashed down on second elder's head. Second elder raised his sword to block, but his sword broke and he died. The 3 elders of the evil sword school couldn't escape, but they didn't know if they should surrender. They finally realized that this young man was even more frightening than their sect leader. Long Fei Yi didn't make a move, but retreated to one side. Yunxi, let me give you some practice. I'll give you the time it takes to brew a cup of tea. Gu smiled. Poison lass, no rush, no rush. Let's take it slow. Seeing second elder's miserable death, the 3 elders didn't dare to negotiate any terms. They all fell to their knees while the head elder handed over a key. Your Highness Crown Prince, Your Highness Princess, this is the key to imprisoning third honored elder. I'll take you there now. Naturally, Long Fei Yi wouldn't really give up on the 3 honored elders. He'd killed second elder because third elder of Hidden Sword Court hadn't shown up yet. With third elder around, he'd be able to find the honored elders. As for the 3 elders of the evil sword school, he couldn't kill them so quickly. Otherwise, how were they supposed to flatten the evil sword school? Alright, I'll spare you all for now. Han Yunxi accepted the key graciously. At this moment, a familiar voice called out from the side. Fei, hurry. There's not enough time, hurry. Chapter 1065. Following the sound, they saw Gu Beiyue rushing over with head honored elder in tow. Han Yunxi and the rest were surprised. They never expected Gu Beiyue to move so quickly. Not only did he take care of the people at the foot of the mountain, but he even saved head elder. He went up and down the mountain to find him. Fei, hurry. Hurry to Nirvana Gorge, the sword ceiling platform's about to crack. Head honored elder was so anxious that he didn't even care about the pain in his organs. He and second honored elder had both been poisoned and locked up on the top floor of Hidden Sword Depository under third elder's personal watch. They could hear the commotion at the peak, but had no idea what was going on. It wasn't until Gu Beiyue captured third elder and rescued them that they realized Fei and Yunxi had returned. The head of Evil Sword School wasn't on Celestial Mountain, so Fei's sword skills and Yunxi's poison skills were enough to deal with the traitors of the Evil Sword sect and the depositories and courtyards. Thus, they immediately had Gu Beiyue take them to Nirvana Gorge. Nirvana Gorge was Tianshan Kenzo's most forbidden area. Within it was a sword ceiling platform that locked up the ancient sword Ganjiang. Tianshan Kenzo's ancestors had found the sword in the past, but were unable to subdue it. Thus, they built the platform and used up all of their strength to seal the sword within. Evil Sword School seemed to be occupying Celestial Mountain this time, but they were actually aiming for Ganjiang. The head of Evil Sword School had limited internal energy, so he couldn't subdue Ganjiang. But before he left, he destroyed the platform to threaten the three honored elders. This was because once the sword sealing platform was destroyed, Ganjiang's sword soul would slowly awaken within a year. The head of Evil Sword School was waiting for the awakening of Ganjiang's sword spirit to force the three honored elders to work together to subdue it. The three honored elders were all at the maximum level of Nirvana heart arts and had unfathomable internal energy, but they still couldn't subdue Ganjiang. They did not inform the Evil Sword School master of this fact. They were hoping that they could regain their freedom before the Ganjiang sword spirit awakened. Then, they could work together to seal the Ganjiang sword spirit in the sword sealing platform. But unexpectedly, when he and Second Venerable rushed to the sword sealing platform, they discovered that the Ganjiang sword soul was awakening. Logically speaking, if the Ganjiang sword spirit was about to awaken, there would be a sign. At the very least, they could sense it from the top of Mount Tianshan. But this time, there were no signs at all, making it hard to figure out. They didn't have the time to think too much about it. Once the Ganjiang sword soul was fully awakened, it wouldn't be easy to suppress it. If he could not suppress it, Ganjiang would definitely fly away from Sky Mountain. Once Ganjiang left Tianshan, it would not be easy to find it again. The Great Venerable didn't know if they could still seal the awakening Ganjiang sword soul with their current strength, but they had to try no matter what. When Long Fei Yi and Han Yunxi learned of this situation, although they had many doubts, they couldn't be bothered to ask. "Gu, look after them." After Long Fei Yi said this, he and Han Yunxi followed the Great Venerable back to Nirvana Valley. Han Yunxi didn't stay idle along the way. She carefully examined the poison in the Great Venerable's body and concocted an antidote for him. When Gu couldn't see their backs, he came back to his senses and realized that he was alone again. How could he be happy that he couldn't participate in such a big show? The entire Mount Tianshan was in chaos. Some disciples surrendered, some fled, and some fought. Granny Yu, who was imprisoned at the bottom of the mountain, had already killed her way to the top of Mount Tianshan. She just happened to be fighting with several experts of the Evil Sword School. No matter how chaotic the situation was, no matter which side had the upper hand, no one dared to provoke Gu on the stage. Even the experts of the Evil Sword School didn't dare to think of saving the three clan elders. In the midst of the chaos, Gu sat cross-legged on the ground. His face was gloomy. His hands were fiddling with something. There seemed to be some pills in his palms. No one knew what he was doing. The three clan elders of the Evil Sword School squatted in front of him. The three of them had already exchanged a few glances, planning on how to escape. Although Gu had Immerse's sword spirit, but he wasn't Long Fei Yi. It was impossible to escape right under Long Fei's nose. But, to escape from Gu's eyes, if they cooperated well, there was still some hope. No matter what, they had to have someone return to Evil Sword Sect to take charge of the situation. If not, when Long Fei Yi and Han Yunxi found them, Evil Sword Sect would be in danger. Sect Master was far away. Distant water couldn't put out a nearby fire. Helplessly, they had really underestimated Gu. Gu was scary when he wasn't serious. But when he was serious, he was even scarier. Long Fei Yi didn't know how to poison, but Gu did. And he was an expert. Just as the great clan elder signaled to the second and third clan elder to take action, Gu's sleeve suddenly shot out a few thorny vines. Once again, they were bound. Although the great clan elder's hands were bound, he still held on to his sword. He said anxiously, "Gu, since when did you become Long Fei Yi's lackey? Why don't you?" Before he could finish, Gu stuffed a poison pill into his mouth. The great clan elder had no choice but to swallow it. He asked in shock, "What did you feed me?" Gu ignored him. He gestured with his finger for the thorny vines to bring the second and third clan elder to him. The second and third clan elder were terrified. They immediately pulled out their swords to cut the thorny vines. But what shocked them was that these thorny vines were different from the previous ones. They couldn't cut them at all. Very quickly, their swords were snatched away by the thorny vines. Gu fiercely pinched their chins and fed them the poison. He then turned around and left. He walked a few steps but turned back. At this time, the great clan elder had already fainted from the poison. The second and third clan elder were terrified. They couldn't guess what Gu wanted to do next. Who knew that Gu squatted down beside the great clan elder? He pulled out a dagger from his calf and cut off the great clan elder's tongue. Although the unconscious great clan elder didn't feel any pain, his tongue started to bleed. A blood-red thorny vine grew out from the great clan elder's mouth. It bared its fangs and brandished its claws, trapping the second and third clan elder. Gu's face was gloomy. He slowly wiped the dagger clean before turning around to leave. The second and third clan elder couldn't find the words to describe their fear. They were so glad that they didn't say anything. Otherwise, the great clan elder's fate would be the end of their lives. This Gu might not be as easy to provoke as Long Fei Yi. Gu's face was gloomy. He shouted, "Who is Granny Yu? Come out now." Once he said that, the chaotic surroundings quietened down. Granny Yu was surrounded by a few experts from the evil sword school. She descended from the sky and shouted, "Seventh young Master Gu, I'm here. Bring me to Nirvana Valley. Hurry." Gu was anxious. Granny Yu was in a difficult position. If not for the poison and the restriction of her inner strength, she wouldn't have been trapped by a few evil sword sect disciples. But when Gu Qishao glanced over, all of the experts tactfully stepped aside. After Granny Yu successfully escaped, she immediately brought Gu to Nirvana Valley. When the evil sword school disciples saw that the great clan elder was dead and the second and third clan elders were trapped, they accepted the fact that the situation was hopeless. They didn't continue to fight and escaped. Nirvana Valley was deep in the valley behind the ninth temple. Before Granny Yu and Gu arrived, they could already feel the strong sword chi ahead. If it was someone with weaker inner strength, they would have been injured by the sword chi before even seeing the treasured sword Ganjiang. The two of them hurried on, but who knew that Gu would suddenly stop? It was as if his acupoints had been sealed and he was frozen stiff. "Seventh young Master Gu, what's wrong?" Granny Yu was shocked. Gu didn't answer. It was as if he had gone berserk, his eyes suddenly turning scarlet. Granny Yu was an experienced and knowledgeable person. She had no idea why Gu would react like that. She nudged Gu and asked, "Seventh young Master Gu, what's wrong with you?" After asking a few more times, Gu didn't answer her. He just stared blankly ahead. Seeing that there was no one around, Granny Yu didn't dare delay and hurriedly flew towards the sword's ceiling platform. When Granny Yu arrived, she saw Long Fei Yi and Han Yunxi fighting with the two supremacies, using their nirvana powers to suppress the Ganjiang sword spirit. Long Fei Yi and Han Yunxi were both at the maximum level of nirvana powers. The two supremacies were also at the maximum level. In addition to Gu Beiyue, who was assisting them, there were 5 of them. However, even with the 5 of them working together, they were still at a disadvantage against the Ganjiang sword spirit. It looked as if they were about to be overwhelmed by the Ganjiang sword spirit. Granny Yu was so anxious that she forgot about Gu and hurriedly joined in. Although her inner strength was limited, she was still a force to be reckoned with. Unfortunately, Granny Yu's participation was just a drop in the bucket. As the Ganjiang sword spirit gradually awoke, its power grew stronger and stronger. Long Fei Yi withdrew his nirvana powers and used the powerful lustbite power instead. Only then did the Ganjiang sword spirit weaken slightly. But soon enough, it grew stronger and stronger until it was obvious that it was suppressing the two supremacies. Fei, we can't hold on any longer. Although the head elder didn't want to admit it, it was the truth. Let's give up. If we keep going, we'll only waste our inner strength, Gu Beiyue said. Everyone had already used all their strength and tried their best. But Long Fei Yi and Han Yunxi both had taut faces as if unwilling to give up. In their lives, there was only, don't want, not give up. Princess, even if Ganjiang leaves Kenzo, no one in the world can subdue it. Why waste everyone's inner strength? There are still many things waiting for us. Gu Beiyue coaxed again. Gu was right. Even if Ganjiang left the sword ceiling platform and disappeared, it wouldn't affect them much in the short term. If they couldn't subdue Ganjiang, who else could? It was precisely because Bai Yanqing didn't have the skills that he was forcing the three honored elders. Han Yunxi was about to give up when a thought flashed through her mind. After some hesitation, she said, "Give me one more chance, I'll try." Everyone agreed, but they didn't know what she was going to do. The two honored elders and Granny Yu were still unaware of the matter of Phoenix energy. Long Fei Yi and Gu Beiyue knew, but they never guessed it was Phoenix energy. Han Yunxi could only control a limited amount of Phoenix energy right now, so it wasn't as strong as a full-level Nirvana heart. But Han Yunxi wanted to test her Phoenix energy. Would there be a miracle? Chapter 1066. A miracle really did happen. As soon as Han Yunxi used her Phoenix energy, the Ganjiang sword spirit's power weakened. To be more precise, it wasn't weak, but less aggressive. What's going on? Everyone exhaled in relief at the same time. Long Fei Yi and Gu Beiyue didn't understand that Han Yunxi's Phoenix energy wasn't even as strong as her Nirvana heart arts. Why did the Ganjiang sword spirit seem to be yielding? At this moment, head honored elder and second honored elder exclaimed in unison, "Phoenix energy." That's the power of the Phoenix. They all looked at Han Yunxi in shock. Yes, Phoenix energy. She was forced by the celestial fire in the medicine requesting cave and obtained it by chance. According to Old Man Alchemy's words, the Phoenix energy was originally hidden in her body and could be awakened, Long Fei Yi explained immediately. The situation was too urgent. Although they'd met with the honored elders, they didn't have time to explain their situation. If their letter from the medicine requesting cave had fallen into Bai Yanqing's hands, then the honored elders and Master Kenshin wouldn't know that Han Yunxi had obtained Phoenix energy by chance or that their dual cultivation had failed. While the Ganjiang sword spirit's power was still calm, Long Fei Yi gave them a concise explanation. The two honored elders exchanged glances before bursting into laughter. No wonder. No wonder. Head honored elder shook his head. No wonder, ah. Fei, no wonder you failed to dual cultivate. Second honored elder grinned. When they saw Fei use both his Nirvana heart arts and Lustbite arts, the two honored elders knew that he hadn't succeeded in dual cultivation and merged the two powers into one. Under these circumstances, they didn't have time to ask questions. They simply assumed that Long Fei Yi was too busy to start dual cultivation. They never expected it to be because of the Phoenix energy. Old Man Alchemy hadn't lied to them, and Bai Yanqing's forged letter had truly tricked them. Fei, it's fortunate that your alchemy furnace was there. Head honored elder sighed with emotion. What do you mean? Han Yunxi was anxious. Actually, she had thought that the phoenix power was not an internal energy, so it could not be compared to the nirvana power in terms of size and strength. That was why she wanted to use the phoenix power to make a bet. She didn't expect that she would win the bet again. Just as the Great Venerable was about to explain, the Ganjiang Sword Soul's power suddenly grew stronger. A resolute look flashed past the Great Venerable's eyes. He decided to take a gamble. He hurriedly retracted his inner energy and said to the second Venerable, Gu Beiyue, and Granny Yu, all of you, back off. Let the two of them try. Although everyone didn't understand the situation, they still listened to the Great Venerable's words and withdrew. But as soon as they did, the Ganjiang Sword Soul's power suddenly weakened, along with its sword on. Just a moment ago, the sword radiance was so dazzling that no one could clearly see the Ganjiang sword, but now, everyone could clearly see that it was a bronze long sword. The sword was more than half unsheathed, standing majestically on the sword ceiling platform. It was like a noble king, standing indomitable and overlooking the crowd. Perhaps the legends of the past were poignant and beautiful. But after thousands of years of bloodshed, the legend had changed. Ganjiang was no longer the name of a swordsmith. It was the name of a treasured sword. Ganjiang was the king of swords. The Great Venerables group stared at the Ganjiang sword in awe. Their hearts were filled with reverence. Of course, they were also rejoicing that the Ganjiang sword soul hadn't left its scabbard yet. Otherwise, no one would be able to keep it in check. The Great Venerables group couldn't sense the Ganjiang sword soul's power, but Long Fei Yi and Han Yunxi could clearly sense that all of its power was concentrated on the sword. It was restless and ready to explode. This power was clearly much stronger than before. Long Fei Yi, since we can't seal it, why don't we try? Han Yunxi's eyes flashed with ruthlessness. Why don't we subdue it? If they couldn't seal it, how could they subdue it? Only Han Yunxi had such ambitions. But the Great Venerables suddenly shouted, Fei, have Yunxi use her phoenix energy to help you subdue Ganjiang, quick. Long Fei Yi was about to agree to Han Yunxi's request, but hearing the Great Venerable's words made him want to try even more. He immediately took to the skies to approach the Ganjiang sword soul, Han Yunxi following closely behind to stand by his side. As soon as the two of them drew close, they felt a strong repulsive force trying to push them away. Long Fei Yi gripped Han Yunxi's hand tightly. One used Lustbite energy and the other her phoenix energy to resist the Ganjiang sword soul's repulsive force. At the same time, Long Fei Yi reached out a hand towards the sword's hilt. His hand gathered all of his strength to slowly penetrate the Ganjiang sword soul's power and approach the sword's hilt. As his hand drew closer, the sword began to vibrate with a clatter. The closer he got, the stronger the repulsive force. Long Fei Yi found it increasingly difficult. Han Yunxi didn't know how to help Long Fei Yi besides helping him resist the repulsive force. Blue veins popped out on the back of Long Fei Yi's hand and arm. There were even a few wounds left by the sword qi. Han Yunxi's heart ached at the sight. She was going to risk it all. She also reached out her hand and covered the back of Long Fei Yi's hand, approaching the sword's hilt with him. Soon, the sharp sword qi cut through her sleeves and her skin. Let go. Long Fei Yi said coldly and fiercely. I won't let go. Unless you take this sword. Han Yunxi also said coldly and fiercely. Long Fei Yi immediately covered Han Yunxi's slender hand with his other hand. However, as soon as he covered it, Han Yunxi covered it with her other hand. In fact, Long Fei Yi couldn't do anything about Han Yunxi's stubbornness most of the time. Streaks of blood gradually appeared on her sleeves. Long Fei Yi felt like his heart was being cut by a knife. His eyes turned cold and in an instant, he gathered all of the Lustbite power into his hand. Han Yunqi seemed to be waiting for this moment. She also gathered all of the Phoenix power into Long Fei Ye's hand. In an instant, a powerful force erupted from their overlapping hands and completely shook off the Ganjiang sword spirit's power. Long Fei Yi held onto the Ganjiang sword's hilt while Han Yunqi's hand covered the back of his hand. The two of them worked together and slowly pressed the sword into the scabbard. When the sword entered the scabbard, all of the Ganjiang sword spirit's power disappeared. Long Fei Yi held the Ganjiang sword firmly in his hand. The two of them looked at each other and smiled tacitly. That power just now was so familiar. Wasn't it the power they obtained together when they were dual cultivating? When husband and wife worked together, there was nothing they couldn't do in this world. Long Fei Yi lowered his head and pressed his forehead intimately against Han Yunqi's forehead. He looked at Han Yunqi's hand that was full of scars and felt heartache and helplessness. Han Yunqi was extremely happy. Long Fei Yi, Ganjiang is already in your bag. Give me the profound frost sword. It was rare for Han Yunqi to ask for something from him. But Long Fei Yi actually didn't give it to her. Give me some time. I'll forge the Immerse sword for you. Profound frost, I can't give it to you. Long Fei Yi said and wanted to bring Han Yunqi away from the sword sealing platform. One must know that Great Venerable and the rest were still waiting below. But Han Yunqi stopped him. She didn't care how many people were waiting below. She didn't care what kind of explanation Great Venerable Lord would give for their dual cultivation and phoenix power. She pulled Long Fei Yi and asked seriously, if you can't give it to me, then who can you give it to? I'll keep it. Long Fei Yi pursed his lips, trying to hold back his laughter. Keep it for who? Han Yunqi asked again. It was rare for her to ask for something from him, but he actually refused. She didn't believe that there wasn't something fishy going on. Thinking about it, there were many people who wanted this profound frost sword. Duan Muyao had some bad intentions. Long Fei Yi smiled but didn't say anything. His reaction made Han Yunqi even more certain that he wanted to give the profound frost sword to someone else. Perhaps other things could be discussed, but this profound frost sword was absolutely out of the question. The profound frost sword was the sword that Long Fei Yi had carried with him for more than 10 years. It had accompanied Long Fei Yi for even longer than she had. Moreover, during their 3 months of dual cultivation, they had shared the same sword every night. The significance of this was too great. Han Yunqi would rather not have Immerse than give up the profound frost sword. Who do you want to keep it for? Are you going to say it or not? Han Yunqi asked seriously. Long Fei Yi finally couldn't help but laugh. He leaned close to her ear and whispered, leave it for your daughter, okay? Han Yunqi didn't expect this. She stared blankly for a long time before bursting into laughter. After laughing for a long time, she asked, why not leave it for your son? The person who was about to ascend the throne actually asked her for a daughter, and not a son. What should Han Yunqi say to him? My daughter is like you. I like my daughter. Long Fei Yi was rarely so direct. Han Yunqi no longer avoided this topic. She looked up at him and said seriously, Your Highness, Chinchia will remember this. If the anxious crowd below knew that the two of them were discussing this topic on the sword-locking platform, how would they feel? Long Fei Yi took the Ganjiang sword and flew down with Han Yunqi. Everyone immediately surrounded them. Even someone as calm as Gu Beiyue revealed a happy expression. This was simply too unexpected. They were supposed to seal Ganjiang, but they'd subdued it instead. It has to be them. It has to be them. Head Honored Elder was the most informed. Head Honored Elder, you. Han Yunqi didn't understand. Just then, Head Honored Elder had said that they were lucky to have come to the medicine hut. Just what was going on? If Yunshi didn't have phoenix energy hidden in her body, then their dual cultivation would have been completed long ago. But if there's phoenix energy hidden within Yunshi's body, then even if it's not awakened, your dual cultivation will still fail. Head Honored Elder controlled his breathing, extremely excited. Dual cultivation with lustbite energy requires 1 yin and 1 yang, 1 strong and 1 weak, 1 main and 1 auxiliary. If Yunshi is too strong, then you'll only have 2 options. 1 is for Faye to find someone else to dual cultivate with, 2 is for you to find a pair of weapons that can be subdued by both lustbite energy and phoenix energy. These weapons need 1 yin and 1 yang, 1 weak and 1 strong. Only by using weapons to support dual cultivation will you have a chance of success. There was no need for Head Honored Elder to explain further. Everyone understood why he was so excited. Just then, Long Fei Yi and Han Yunshi used lustbite energy and phoenix energy to subdue Ganjiang. Ganjiang and Mo Xia then became husband and wife swords, 1 yin and 1 yang. Isn't that what Long Fei Yi and Mo Xia needed for their dual cultivation? If that was the case, they really had to thank their trip to the medicine hut. If they hadn't drawn out Han Yunshi's phoenix energy, they might never have found the reason for their dual cultivation failure. They finally understood why their dual cultivation had failed and found a way to solve the problem. Faye, it's a good thing you came. Head Honored Elder grew serious in his excitement. If your dual cultivation fails and you can't fix it after a year, the two of you will definitely suffer from cultivation deviation and kill each other. At his words, Long Fei Yi and Han Yunshi felt a lingering fear. They looked towards Gu Beiyue. Although this was a cruel choice, it was the right one. While everyone was sighing with emotion, Granny Yu suddenly cried out, "Gu!" Chapter 1067. Only then did Granny Yu remember Gu. Faye, something's happened to Sir Gu Qi. Quick, come with me. Granny Yu was frantic. Long Fei Yi wasn't in a rush, but Han Yunshi was. What's wrong with him? Gu had Mo Xia's sword spirit and his poison arts to protect him. It wouldn't be hard for him to deal with the 3 surrendered evil sword school elders. I don't know what's wrong with him either. Come with me. Granny Yu hurried back the way they'd come, so everyone followed. But they hadn't gone very far before they saw Gu Qishao walking towards them, perfectly fine. What's wrong with him? Long Fei Yi finally spoke. I just brought him here, but he suddenly turned stupid and stood there unmoving. No matter how I called him, he didn't respond. Now, why? Granny Yu grew more and more bewildered. From a distance, Gu really was unscathed and perfectly normal. Long Fei Yi didn't speak, but when Gu drew closer, everyone realized something was off. Granny Yu and the 2 honored elders didn't sense it too clearly, but Long Fei Yi and the rest who were familiar with Gu could tell right away that something was wrong with him. To be more precise, it was the way he looked at Long Fei Yi that was very strange. If this was any other time, Gu wouldn't even look Long Fei Yi in the eye. If he did, it would be with a look of lofty disdain. But his gaze hadn't left Long Fei's side since he'd arrived. His long, narrow eyes were filled with an indescribable emotion. Han Yunshi didn't like the look in his eyes. She subconsciously walked over to Long Fei Ye's side and grabbed Long Fei Ye's hand. Long Fei Yi was bewildered, but he remained calm. He glared coldly at Gu. But Gu Qishao was still staring at him. Long Fei Yi said coldly, "What are you looking at?" Long Fei Yi, I. Why am I? Gu was confused. Why do I have the guts to? He thought for a long time, but couldn't come up with a reason. Long Fei Ye's cold face had already darkened. Han Yunxi couldn't help but say, "What kind of guts are you talking about? What's wrong with you?" "There's a feeling." Gu pondered for a while before replying thoughtfully, "There's a very complicated feeling." As soon as these words came out, everyone was stunned. "What do you mean by a particularly complicated feeling? Why did it sound so ambiguous?" The entire place was silent. Gu and Long Fei Yi looked at each other. Gu's devastatingly beautiful face was filled with confusion, giving people an indescribable feeling of joy. As for Long Fei Yi, his face couldn't be any uglier. Long Fei Yi had seen many adoring gazes in his life, but this was the first time he was stared at so ambiguously by a man. Was Gu flirting with him, or was he provoking him? He was simply tired of living. In the silence, while Gu was still confused, Long Fei Yi suddenly drew his sword. He didn't draw his profound frost sword, but the ancient sword Ganjiang that he had just obtained. Ganjiang had a temper. This was Granny Yu's first time seeing it, so she couldn't believe her eyes. The Ganjiang sword was locked up at the peak, but Mo Xie's sword spirit had long been destroyed. Mo Xie's sword spirit had also vanished from the Jianghu for a long time. The three of them never expected to see Mo Xie's sword spirit again in their lifetime, much less that it would be under Gu's control. Han Yunxi told them about their experiences in Qingchuan Water City, causing the two honored elders and Granny Yu to sigh with emotion. "This really is effortless. Fei, old man was worried that you wouldn't be able to find Mo Xia within a year, but now it looks like there's hope for your dual cultivation as long as we can reforge a Mo Xia's sword." Head honored elder was thrilled. Second honored elder and Granny Yu stared at Mo Xia's sword spirit, unable to tear their eyes away. What swordsman didn't love treasured swords? The Ganjiang sword was too powerful, so they could only admire it from afar. Mo Xie's sword spirit was female, so it was gentler than the Ganjiang sword. Moreover, it only had a sword spirit and not a sword body, so it only had half of its original strength. That was why they had a chance to observe it up close. Reforging a sword. Long Fei Yi was lost in thought. Finding Mo Xie's sword spirit at Qingchuan Water City had been an accident, and finding the Ganjiang sword back at Celestial Mountain had been unexpected as well. Who knew that these two accidents would actually lead to his dual cultivation with Han Yunxi? Head honored elder was right. If they hadn't found Mo Xie's sword spirit by chance, they wouldn't have been able to find Mo Xie's sword spirit within a year. Now all they had left to do was reforge the sword. Long Fei Ye's first thought was of Qingchuan Water City's swordsmith, Yi Shao. Han Yunxi had spared Yi Shao and the proprietress's life back then because of the old saying that helping others was helping oneself. Yi Shao should be willing to help. While everyone was sighing over Mo Xie's Ganjiang sword spirit, Gu said coldly, "Which one of you can take away Mo Xie's sword spirit first?" "I can't take it." If he hadn't met Ganjiang, Gu would have liked Mo Xie's sword spirit very much. After all, with the help of Mo Xie's sword spirit, he would have been able to join the ranks of first-rate experts. However, in this situation, he was basically under Long Fei Ye's control. If he angered Long Fei Yi in any way, Long Fei Yi would just have to draw his sword and leave him in a daze for half a day. What a scam! Actually, the two honored elders and Granny Yu wanted to temporarily take Mo Xia in to experience what it was like to have a sword spirit. Unfortunately, they couldn't. Mo Xia's sword spirit was already powerful and had a vicious aura. It wasn't something that ordinary people could take. Gu Beiyue still felt sorry for Shao Qi. He smiled and said, "If your highness and princess work together, you can use the power of the lust bite and the power of the phoenix to subdue Mo Xia. Back at Qingchuan Water City, Han Yunxi's phoenix power hadn't been activated yet. Otherwise, Mo Xia wouldn't have fallen into Gu's hands. At Gu Beiyue's reminder, Gu chuckled and looked at Han Yunxi. Poison Lass, Ganjiang and Mo Xia are husband and wife. If Long Feiyi gets Ganjiang, Mo Xia will naturally be yours. How can Qi brother snatch something from you? Hurry up and take it back, alright? Han Yunxi smiled innocently. Just as she was about to reply, Long Feiyi suddenly tossed Ganjiang to Gu. Gu caught it instinctively and realized that the sword was especially heavy. Take it back after you've forged the sword. This sword will be in your care for the time being. Keep a close eye on it. If you lose it, you'll pay with your life. Long Feiyi's eyes were cold. He didn't finish his sentence, but it was enough to threaten Gu. The words, pay with your life, reminded Gu Qishao of something. Gu was able to subdue Mo Xia's sword spirit with his body because he had an immortal body. If it was Han Yunxi, who had a normal body of flesh and blood, he might not have succeeded. If it didn't work, everyone would doubt his constitution. A complicated look flashed past Gu's eyes. He held Ganjiang with both hands and didn't dare to say a word. Those who didn't know the situation would think that he was really threatened by Long Feiyi. Just like that, Gu became Long Feiyi's sword slave and helped carry the sword. Although forging a sword was a big deal, now wasn't the time to talk about it. The chaos in Tianshan Kenzo was still waiting for them to clean up. Kenzo's old man was unconscious and had been brought back to Juchong Hall by the disciples. The two supremacies and Granny Yu stayed behind to preside over the situation. Long Feiyi's group of 4 brought the 2 Evil Sword School elders and immediately rushed to the Evil Sword School to save Third Supremacy. When they arrived at the Evil Sword School, they found that the Evil Sword School was already empty. Only a few disciples who didn't manage to escape in time were left. It didn't matter if the disciples escaped. The Evil Sword School's 2nd and 3rd elder were still in their hands. They weren't afraid that they wouldn't be able to find Third Supremacy. Where are they? Han Yunxi asked coldly. The 2nd and 3rd elders had been frightened by the Great Elder's death and had already submitted to Long Feiyi's group. In the secret prison. The 2nd elder hurriedly replied. When the 2nd and 3rd elders brought Han Yunxi's group to the secret prison, they found that it was already empty. Where are they? Long Feiyi asked coldly. Third Supremacy wasn't an ordinary prisoner. The 3 elders were at the peak of Tianshan Mountain, and Bai Yanqing wasn't in the Evil Sword School. Who else had the key to the prison? You're tuning in to the LoveLore Library YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.